The story reaches back farther than memory, farther than stone monuments or royal names carved into history. Long before pyramids rose from desert sands, before statues gazed across the horizon, before civilization had a shape anyone would recognize, there were words pressed into wet clay by careful hands. Those marks were humanity's first attempt to explain where everything came from, what existed before order, and why the world is the way it is. The Sumerian scribes did not begin with drama or spectacle. They did not speak of fiery chariots falling from the sky or gods arriving fully formed from distant realms. Instead, they spoke of beginnings so old that even time itself had not yet learned how to move forward. A state of existence where nothing was fixed, where reality had not yet chosen its form, in that beginning there was only Namu, not a goddess as later cultures would imagine one. No human face, no throne, no stories of desire or conflict. Namu was water, but not water you could drink or touch. She was water as potential, an endless, undivided cosmic sea, containing everything that would ever exist, yet expressing nothing at all. She was possibility without shape, depth without direction, a vast stillness waiting for creation to begin. For the people who lived between the Tigris and Euphrates, water was not an abstraction. It was survival itself. Their cities rose and fell with the floods. When the rivers came at the right time, life flourished. When they came too violently, or not at all, famine followed. So when the Sumerians imagined the birth of existence, they imagined water first, not as chaos, but as the source from which life could emerge. Namu existed alone in this primordial state. She did not require a partner, a counterpart, or a divine union. She was complete. Creation flowed from her because creation already existed within her. This idea stood apart from many later myths, where the universe is born from the tension between opposites. Before male and female, before division, before duality itself, there was only one source. From her own essence, Namu brought forth two fundamental forces. And the sky, vast, high, and all-encompassing. And Ki, the earth, solid, grounded, and fertile. These were not gods walking on human legs or speaking with human voices. They were principles. Sky and earth pressed together in a single mass, locked in a cosmic embrace. Nothing could grow, nothing could breathe, because there was no space between them. All potential existed, but nothing could yet live. That changed with Enlil. Born from a union of sky and earth, Enlil embodied wind, breath, and movement. In creation, according to the Sumerian mind, was not gentle. It required force. Enlil tore sky from earth, thrusting it upward and pressing Ki downward. In that violent separation, space was born. Air rushed in where nothing had existed before. Breath became possible. Weather could move. Life could begin. The ordered cosmos emerged in layers. Sky above, earth below, and the living space between them. This simple structure defined how the Sumerians understood reality. It mirrored what they could see and feel, the unreachable heavens, the solid ground beneath their feet, and the invisible air that sustained them every moment of their lives. Yet the texts hint at something even older, something difficult to describe even for those ancient scribes. Before the separation, before sky and earth, before form itself, there was only water, undivided, indistinguishable, infinite. No fresh or salt, no river or sea, just totality. Later traditions would split these waters into different beings, but the earliest Sumerian memory held onto a single source. Namu came before all division, before categories, before names. The world took shape. More gods emerged, filling the newly created spaces with order and function. But none of them were the first. None stood at the beginning. And long before the Anunnaki ever appeared in the stories that modern culture would later twist and reinterpret, the universe was already old, layered, and governed by forces that had nothing to do with visitors from the sky. This was not a tale of sudden intervention. It was a slow unfolding, from water to space, from stillness to motion, from potential to form. And the story was only just beginning as the ordered world is settled into its basic shape. The space Enlil had torn open did not remain empty for long. The air between heaven and earth became a living realm, filled with movement, sound, and change. Wind swept across the plains, clouds gathered and broke, rain fell, and the rhythms of nature began to establish themselves. This was no longer a universe suspended in pure possibility. It was a world in motion, governed by cycles that could be observed, feared, and relied upon. From this newly structured cosmos, the gods themselves were born into time. They did not exist outside creation, looking down upon it from some unreachable elsewhere. They emerged within it, shaped by its rules and bound to its balance. The divine family grew generation by generation, each new deity taking responsibility for some aspect of existence. Light, darkness, growth, decay, each found its guardian. Among them was Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and cunning insight, while Enlil ruled the air and storms. Enki claimed the depths beneath the earth, the hidden waters that flowed unseen through stone and soil. These were not destructive floods, but life-giving currents, springs that bubbled up unexpectedly, wells that sustained cities, the quiet reservoirs beneath the land that never fully disappeared even in drought. Enki was clever where others were forceful, inventive where others were rigid. He understood how systems worked and how they could be bent without breaking. The Sumerians believed that beneath the ground stretched the Abzu, an endless subterranean ocean of fresh water. This was Enki's domain, and it was no distant mythic realm. It was something they felt beneath their feet. Whenever they dug deep enough, water appeared. From this simple observation grew a vast cosmology. The world itself rested upon primordial waters, just as it had emerged from them in the beginning. Near the ancient shoreline of the Persian Gulf stood Eridu, a city the Sumerians called the first city, the place where civilization itself began. Here stood Enki's temple, known as the House of the Abzu. It was believed to be built at the very point where the cosmic waters touched the human world, where the boundary between order and the deep was thinnest. Priests who served there believed they were standing at the axis of creation itself, the place where the old chaos still whispered beneath the surface of civilization. As generations of gods filled the cosmos, order expanded. The sun god Utu rose each day to bring light and justice, revealing truth simply by shining upon it. The moon god Nana marked time itself, his cycles guiding months, festivals, and the rhythm of human life. Inanna blazed across the sky as Venus, embodying love and desire on one hand, war and destruction on the other. A reminder that creation and ruin were inseparable forces. These gods shaped the patterns of existence long before humans played any meaningful role in the world. They regulated seasons, controlled floods, decided when crops would grow and when storms would rage. The cosmos was functional, but it was not effortless. The work of maintaining creation was heavy, and not all gods were equally powerful. The lesser gods were tasked with the physical labor of keeping the world running. They dug canals to guide water across the plains. They piled up earth to raise temples. They crushed clay to make bricks. Over time, exhaustion set in. Their labor never ended, and resentment grew. While the great gods ruled from above, the workers below began to groan. Their complaints echoed through the ordered world, carried by wind and water, until they reached Namu herself. The primordial mother had not disappeared with creation. She still existed beneath it all, older than sky and earth, older than the gods who now governed reality. Gathering the tears of the weary gods, she descended into the Abzu and woke her son Enki from his rest. She asked him how order could survive if those who maintained it were breaking under its weight. Enki listened. And in that moment, the balance of creation shifted again. Instead of forcing the lesser gods to continue their endless labor, Enki proposed something entirely new. A substitute. Beings who would take on the work of the world, digging canals, raising cities, tending fields, so the gods themselves could rule without exhaustion. To accomplish this, Enki turned once more to the oldest substance of all, clay drawn from the edge of the Abzu, infused with the essence of the primordial waters. With the help of birth goddesses skilled in shaping life, he molded a new kind of being, neither god nor animal, but something in between. Humanity. These first humans were formed from the same substance as the cosmos itself, not from punishment or conquest, not from the remains of defeated monsters, but from sacred material touched by divine presence. They were created with purpose, but also with potential. They could work, learn, adapt, and endure. Yet creation was not perfect on the first attempt. The gods experimented. Some humans were formed with weaknesses, others with differences. Some could not see, some could not walk. Instead of discarding them, Enki assigned them roles within society, showing that usefulness did not have a single shape. Even imperfection had a place in the cosmic design. This was not the work of cold engineers following a fixed plan. It was creative problem solving, trial and error, a living process, and still, the world humanity inherited was harsh. There was no grain yet, no sheep, no fields heavy with harvest. Humans wandered nearly naked, eating wild plants and drinking from ditches, surviving but not thriving. They existed, but civilization had not yet been given to them. That, too, would change, but only after another gift from the gods. The world the first humans stepped into was quiet in a way later generations would never know. There were no fields stretching to the horizon, no granaries filled with surplus, no flocks moving like living clouds across the plains. The land was raw and unfinished. People survived, but only barely, living much as animals did, gathering what they could, chewing tough grasses, drinking from streams when they found them. They had awareness, a spark that set them apart from beasts, but they lacked the knowledge to shape the world around them. The gods observed this condition, and it did not go unnoticed. In the divine realm, it became clear that labor alone was not enough. Humans could relieve the gods of physical work, but without tools, without systems, without reliable food, they could not sustain the cosmic order in the long term. A fragile workforce would eventually collapse, and chaos would creep back in through hunger and disorder as the gods acted again. They brought into existence Ashnan and Lahar, grain and sheep, embodied as divine beings rather than mere resources. These were not just food sources, they were technologies made sacred. With Ashnan came the knowledge of cultivation, how to plant, tend, and harvest crops that could be stored and shared. With Lahar came animal husbandry, wool for clothing, milk for nourishment, meat for sustenance, and flocks that could multiply under human care. When these gifts reached the human world, everything changed. People learned to settle instead of wander. Fields replaced wild grasses. Herds replaced hunted animals. For the first time, humans could produce more than they immediately consumed. Surplus appeared, and with it came time to build, to plan, to remember, and to imagine. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. Labor could be divided. Some worked the fields, others shaped clay into bricks, others learned the marks of writing that would preserve memory beyond a single lifetime. This was not evolution in the modern sense. It was transmission, knowledge passed down from the divine realm, reshaping human existence within a handful of generations. Civilization did not slowly crawl forward. It was lifted into being. As cities rose, the gods organized the world more carefully. Creation, once separated and stabilized, now required management. Enki surveyed the land and assigned responsibilities, establishing a divine administration that mirrored the emerging human one. Each god oversaw a specific domain: rivers and irrigation, crops and fertility, construction and craftsmanship, storms and winds, justice and law. Nothing was left without a guardian. Through this structure, order was maintained. Floods came, but not endlessly. Crops failed, but not always. Storms destroyed, but they also renewed. The world became predictable enough to live in, but never safe enough to ignore the gods. And somewhere within this ordered cosmos, kingship emerged. According to the Sumerians, rulership was not invented by humans. It descended from heaven. Authority itself was a divine gift, placed into the hands of chosen figures who stood between gods and people. The earliest of these rulers did not govern as ordinary men. They belonged to a different age, one closer to creation, when the boundary between divine and human was thinner. The Sumerian king list begins here, in a time before history as we know it. It names cities that existed before the Great Flood: Urdu, Badtabra, Larak, Sapar, Shurapak, and rulers whose reigns lasted tens of thousands of years. These numbers defy ordinary understanding, stretching far beyond human lifespans. The Sumerians did not see this as an error. They understood the world before the flood as fundamentally different. Time itself behaved differently then. Life was longer, closer to the divine source, less constrained by the limits that would later define humanity. These antediluvian kings were not fully human in the later sense. They were transitional beings, carrying divine authority in a purer form, ruling during a mythic age when creation was still fresh and flexible. Only after this age ended, after catastrophe reshaped the world, would humanity fully step into historical time. And it is here, at the edge of that coming disaster, that another group of gods begins to appear more clearly in the texts. Not as creators of the universe, not as the originators of humanity, but as figures who operate within an already established order: the Anunnaki. Their role was not to descend from the stars or reshape humanity from scratch. They emerged later, as part of the growing divine hierarchy, associated with fate, judgment, and the deep places beneath the earth. Their story belongs to what came after creation, not to its beginning. And the flood that would redefine everything was drawing closer. As the world settled into its patterns of work and worship, abundance brought new problems alongside its blessings. Cities grew dense and loud. Canals crisscrossed the plains. Temples rose toward the sky, and humanity multiplied across the land that had once been empty. The very success of civilization strained the balance the gods had worked so carefully to maintain. In the divine realm, dissatisfaction began to spread. The lesser gods, once relieved of their physical labor, now complained of something different. Humanity had become noisy. Their cities rang with sound, voices, tools, celebrations, and constant activity. To mortal ears, it was life itself. To the gods, especially those who valued order and distance, it was an irritation that disrupted divine rest. Councils were called. The great gods gathered to discuss what should be done. This was not a meeting of invaders or conquerors, but of administrators struggling with the consequences of their own creation. Humanity had fulfilled its purpose too well. The very beings meant to stabilize the cosmos were now threatening its tranquility. Enlil, forceful and uncompromising as ever, argued that the problem needed a permanent solution. Humanity, he believed, had grown out of control. If order was to be preserved, the numbers of people had to be reduced. Disease, famine, and drought were sent first. Subtle corrections meant to restore balance without total destruction. But Enki did not agree. Bound to humanity through the act of creation, Enki found ways to soften these punishments. He whispered knowledge to humans in dreams, teaching them how to survive famine, how to store grain, how to endure drought. Again and again, his interventions preserved human life, frustrating the harsher intentions of the divine council. This quiet resistance could not last forever. When lesser measures failed, the gods turned to a final solution: the flood. This was not conceived as random destruction, nor as a punishment for moral failure. It was a cosmic reset. The waters that had existed before creation would return, dissolving the fragile structures of civilization and washing the world back toward its primordial state. Humanity, along with its noise and excess, would be erased. An oath was sworn among the gods to keep this decision secret. But Enki, bound by oath not to speak directly, found another way. He did not warn humanity as a whole. He chose one. In the city of Shurapak lived a righteous ruler named Zayusadra. He was wise, attentive to the gods, and capable of understanding what others could not. Enki spoke to him indirectly through the walls of a reed hut, allowing the message to pass without breaking divine law. He described the coming flood and gave precise instructions: build a vessel, seal it well, preserve life within it. Zayusadra obeyed. When the flood came, it was overwhelming. Rain fell without pause. Rivers burst their banks. The plains became a single endless sea. Cities disappeared beneath the water. Temples collapsed. The ordered world, built over generations, dissolved back into chaos. For days and nights without number, the waters covered everything. When the flood finally receded, the world was silent again, stripped bare, waiting to be remade. Zayusadra emerged from the vessel and offered thanks to the gods. The divine council, seeing that life had survived, felt both relief and regret. They recognized that total destruction had been a mistake. A new agreement was forged. Humanity would continue, but under stricter limits. Lifespans would be shortened. The boundary between gods and humans would harden. Direct interaction would become rare. Kingship would remain divine in origin, but kings themselves would now be fully mortal. This was the dividing line between mythic time and historical time that it was after the flood, in this newly constrained world that the Anunnaki took on clearer roles. They became judges of fate, overseers of the underworld, enforcers of cosmic law. Their authority did not come from creation itself, but from administration, maintaining order in a world no longer fluid and new. What followed was not the age of gods walking openly among humans, but the age of memory. Stories replaced presence. Ritual replaced direct contact. Writing preserved what living voices could no longer reach. And in those clay tablets, pressed into the earth by human hands, the Sumerians left behind their understanding of beginnings. Not tales of visitors from the stars, but of water, labor, balance, and responsibility. A world born not from spectacle, but from necessity. After the flood, the world no longer felt young. Something essential had changed. The easy closeness between gods and humans was gone, sealed away with the retreating waters. Where once divine voices moved freely through dreams, storms, and rivers, now there was distance. The cosmos had hardened into a more rigid shape. The gods still ruled, but they ruled from afar. Humanity rebuilt. Cities rose again on the same plains, often atop the ruins of those that had been swallowed by water. New temples were laid upon old foundations. Canals were dug once more, following paths remembered rather than rediscovered. Agriculture returned, but now it came with vulnerability. Harvest failed. Lives ended sooner. Time pressed harder on human bodies than it ever had in the age before the flood. This was no accident. The gods had rewritten the terms of existence. Humans would no longer live for tens of thousands of years. They would no longer walk the edge of the divine realm. Mortality became firm and unavoidable. Death, once distant, now shaped every decision. And with death came judgment that it was here that the Anunnaki assumed their clearest identity. They were not creators. They were not benefactors. They were not teachers of civilization. They were judges, powers bound to the underworld, to fate, to the final accounting of human lives. When a person died, their spirit did not ascend into light or glory. It descended, passing beneath the earth into a shadowed realm where the Anunnaki presided. Their destiny was weighed, not in terms of moral purity as later religions would frame it, but in accordance with cosmic order. Everyone, king and laborer alike, shared the same ultimate fate. The afterlife was not a reward or a punishment. It was a continuation, dim, still, and inevitable. What mattered most, therefore, was not what happened after death, but how life was lived before it. This understanding shaped Sumerian civilization at its core. Temples were not built to escape mortality, but to maintain balance. Rituals were not performed to gain eternal salvation, but to keep the gods favorable, the rivers flowing, and the seasons turning as they should. Kings ruled not as divine beings, but as stewards, human caretakers of a fragile order that could fail if neglected. The Anunnaki enforced that order from below. They ensured that oaths mattered, that fate unfolded according to decree, that even the gods themselves were bound by rules older than any single divine will. In this sense, they were not tyrants or invaders, but mechanisms of balance, necessary, feared, and deeply respected. Over time, stories shifted. Later cultures inherited fragments of these myths and reshaped them. Names changed, roles blurred. Water became chaos instead of origin. Judges became monsters. Primordial forces were recast as enemies to be defeated rather than sources to be honored. And in the modern age, speculation replaced careful reading. Ancient symbols were bent to fit new fantasies, but the clay tablets never said the gods came from the stars. They spoke instead of water beneath the earth, of labor and responsibility, of creation as an ongoing process rather than a single perfect act. They described a universe that had to be managed, repaired, and sometimes corrected. A world where humanity mattered, not because it was chosen, but because it was necessary that in the end. The Sumerian story is not about gods descending from heaven, that it is about humanity rising out of clay, shaped by water older than time, given purpose through work, constrained by mortality, and bound forever to the fragile balance between order and chaos. The tablets do not promise secret knowledge of lost technologies or visitors from distant worlds. They offer something quieter and perhaps more unsettling. They tell us that civilization was never meant to be permanent, only maintained. And because civilization was never meant to last on its own, the Sumerians believed it had to be constantly renewed. Every ritual, every offering placed before a statue, every hymn sung in a temple courtyard was an act of maintenance. The universe did not run automatically. It could drift. It could decay. Neglect did not merely anger the gods. It weakened the fabric of reality itself. Floods, droughts, invasion, famine. These were not random disasters, but signs that balance had slipped, that something in the relationship between gods and humans had gone unfulfilled. This is why memory mattered so deeply. Writing itself was sacred. The wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay were more than records. They were anchors. By preserving hymns, myths, and king lists, humans were not just remembering the past. They were helping to hold the cosmos together. To forget was dangerous. To lose the stories was to risk returning to chaos. The Anunnaki remained in the background of this system, rarely named in everyday devotion, yet always present. They were invoked in oaths, feared in death, and acknowledged in moments when fate felt unavoidable. Their power was quiet and absolute. They did not need temples filled with praise. Their authority existed whether humans believed in them or not. And over generations, the gods themselves grew more distant. Where once creation stories spoke of divine hands shaping clay and gods arguing face to face, later texts emphasized law, decree, and fate. The universe became less personal, more procedural. Divine will hardened into destiny. The age of myth slowly gave way to the age of history. Kings no longer ruled for tens of thousands of years. Their reigns became measurable, their failures visible. Dynasties rose and fell. Cities burned. Empires collapsed. Each time, the pattern repeated. Order, growth, excess, collapse. Not because the gods abandoned humanity, but because this cycle was built into existence itself. The flood had not erased chaos. It had merely pushed it back. Beneath the earth, the Abzu still flowed. Above the sky, the waters were still held back by a fragile barrier. Between them, humanity lived in a narrow space carved out by divine violence and sustained by constant effort. The Sumerians understood this precariousness deeply. Their myths were not comforting. They did not promise salvation, transcendence, or escape. They offered realism. You were born from sacred clay, but you would return to dust. You could build cities, but they would fall. You could honor the gods, but you could never control them. Order was precious precisely because it was temporary. And so the tablets end not with revelation, but with responsibility. The ancient scribes were not trying to impress the future. They were trying to warn it. They recorded a universe that did not revolve around humanity, yet depended on human action to remain stable. A world where meaning came not from origin stories of the stars, but from daily labor, shared memory, and respect for forces far older than any civilization. What the Sumerians left behind was not a secret history of visitors from the sky. It was a mirror point one that still reflects the same truth thousands of years later. Everything we build stands on water, on balance, and on time that does not belong to us. Long after the last scribe set down his stylus, long after the temples of Eridu and Uar cracked and sank back into the earth, the world the Sumerians described continued on its path. Rivers shifted their courses. Shorelines crept outward. Cities were buried beneath layers of silt and memory. Yet the structure they imagined never disappeared. Water still moves beneath the ground, unseen but essential. Storms still remind humanity how small it is. Civilizations still rise when balance is kept and collapse when it is ignored. The ancient model remains intact, even if the names have changed. What the Sumerians understood, perhaps better than any culture that followed, was that beginnings are not the most important part of the story. Continuity is. Survival is. Responsibility is. They did not ask where the gods came from in order to worship them blindly. They asked so they could understand their place in a fragile system. Humans were not masters of creation, nor its victims. They were caretakers positioned between forces above and below, required to work, remember, and repeat the rituals that kept existence from unraveling. The Anunnaki, silent and patient, were never meant to inspire wonder. They were meant to inspire restraint. A reminder that fate exists whether it is acknowledged or not, and that every action carries weight beyond a single lifetime. Even the flood was not the end. It was a correction, but a reminder written in water that excess invites collapse, that noise invites silence, and that creation can always be undone if balance is forgotten. The world that followed was harsher, shorter-lived, and more distant from the divine, but also more real. History began where myth stepped back, and perhaps that is the quiet power of these clay tablets. They do not promise salvation. They do not offer escape. They do not flatter humanity. They simply tell us that existence is maintained, not guaranteed. That order must be renewed again and again. And that beneath every city, every empire, every story we tell about ourselves, the ancient waters still wait, patient, eternal, unchanged, just as they always have. What followed after those first understandings was not silence, but reinterpretation. As centuries passed, new peoples inherited the land between the rivers. Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians. Each spoke different tongues, wore different crowns, and carved their own names into stone. Yet none of them truly replaced the Sumerian vision. They layered themselves on top of it, reshaping the myths without breaking their foundation. The old gods did not vanish. They were renamed, reorganized, absorbed into larger pantheons. Namu faded into the background, but water remained sacred and Lil's authority shifted. But storms still carried divine, while the Enki's cleverness lived on in gods of wisdom and magic. The Anunnaki became more fearsome in later retellings. Their judicial roles exaggerated as cultures grew more anxious about death and destiny. The myths darkened because life did. Empires brought scale, armies, taxation, forced labor, conquest. Where early city-states had focused on balance, later powers focused on control. The gods reflected this change. They became less like forces of nature and more like rulers with tempers, demands, and punishments. What had once been maintenance of order was increasingly framed as obedience to authority. Yet even in these altered stories, the original structure remained visible if one knew how to look. The universe was still layered. Water still enclosed everything. Humanity still lived in a narrow middle space. And collapse was still inevitable when excess went unchecked. The flood story itself evolved, retold in new languages, with new names. Zayusidra became Atrahasis, then Utnapishtim. Details shifted, motives changed, but the core never did. The gods regretted destruction. Life survived through foresight, and humanity emerged afterward diminished but persistent. This persistence mattered. The Sumerians never believed humans were meant to triumph over the gods. Survival itself was the victory. To continue planting, building, writing, and remembering in a world that could erase everything. That was meaning. And so the clay tablets endured where empires did not. Fired accidentally in the destruction of cities, hardened by catastrophe, buried and forgotten, they waited. Not preserved by intention, but by chance. When modern hands finally unearthed them, they expected epic heroics, cosmic battles, revelations of ultimate truth. What they found instead was restraint, and final answers, and promised endings, and hidden technology or divine lineage. Just a worldview grounded in limits. The Sumerians accepted that the gods themselves were constrained by older forces. Even Enlil could not undo water. Even Enki could not grant immortality to humanity as a whole. Even the Anunnaki answered to laws written into the structure of existence, that in this sense, their myths were less about belief and more about understanding. They explained why suffering existed without framing it as punishment. They explained why death was universal without calling it unjust. They explained why order was rare without pretending it was permanent. And maybe that is why these stories still unsettle modern readers. They refuse to center humanity as the endpoint of creation. They refuse to promise progress without collapse. They refuse to say that history is moving towards something better. Instead, they suggest that history moves in circles, wide, slow, relentless ones, shaped by water, labor, memory, and forgetting. Civilizations rise because balance is briefly achieved. They fall because balance is always temporary. The Sumerians did not try to escape this truth. They wrote it down. And in doing so, they left behind not a prophecy, not a warning of gods from the sky, but a quiet message carved into clay, that the world does not belong to us, that it never did, and that surviving within it requires humility more than knowledge. The story, as they understood it, never truly ends. After the flood, the world that emerged was recognizably human, yet still haunted by the echoes of a primordial past. The cities were rebuilt, temples raised again, canals dug with renewed precision. But the sense of intimacy with the divine had shifted. The gods were no longer walking directly among humans, sharing labor and guidance. Now, they observed from their celestial heights, intervening selectively, governing the rhythms of life in ways both subtle and severe. Humans, once semi-divine collaborators in the maintenance of the cosmos, now carried responsibility with far less divine oversight. The knowledge that had been imparted, agriculture, irrigation, metallurgy, the organization of cities, became the tools of survival rather than instruments of sacred service. Civilization advanced, but in doing so, it slowly obscured the connection to the waters, the forces, the very structure that had made that survival possible. Enki, who had once walked the boundaries between the cosmic deep and the mortal realm, became a figure of guidance rather than intervention. His wisdom, encoded in myths and temple rituals, acted as a bridge between divine law and human innovation. Priests, scribes, and kings who understood fragments of this knowledge assumed the role of intermediaries, translating cosmic order into practical governance. They were the inheritors of a sacred legacy that stretched back to the age of Namu and the first separation of heaven and earth. The Anunnaki, meanwhile, became increasingly enmeshed in the administration of justice, death, and fate. Their presence, once associated with the broader divine genealogy and cosmic order, shifted toward enforcing boundaries, social, moral, and cosmic. They judged the dead, decreed destinies, and ensured that the mortal realm remained aligned with the structure established long before their generation. The terror and awe they inspired reflected not a desire for domination, but the recognition that the order of existence was fragile and must be protected. Humanity, caught between the gods above and the primordial waters below, began to construct myths to understand its place. They created stories that reflected both hope and caution, tales of kingship descending from heaven, of cities blessed with divine favor, of floods that punished hubris, but also reset the equilibrium of the world. Each myth was a reminder that life was contingent, that survival required vigilance, and that the cosmos was not static, but a balance maintained through effort, awareness, and sometimes sacrifice. Over time, these stories accumulated layers, interpretations piled upon interpretations, each generation reshaping the narrative to suit its understanding of power, morality, and survival. The Sumerian vision of creation, rooted in primordial waters, divine collaboration, and the painstaking establishment of order, became the foundation of later Mesopotamian cosmologies. Gods multiplied, attributes shifted, and mythologies became more intricate. Yet beneath the elaboration, the principles remained: water as origin, separation as creation, labor as necessity, and balance as survival. Even the notion of kingship, given by the gods, evolved. Rulers were no longer semi-divine beings with impossibly long lifespans, but humans who could aspire to the divine by governing wisely, maintaining canals, distributing resources, and honoring the ancient principles embedded in the land itself. To rule was to participate in the ongoing preservation of cosmic order, not to dominate creation. The ideal of governance as sacred duty persisted even as human mortality returned to its natural limits. And as humans labored, celebrated, built, and occasionally destroyed, the underlying truth remained hidden in plain sight, that the world is sustained not by the whims of gods or kings, but by the careful maintenance of balance. Seasons, rivers, crops, cities, and human relationships all were interwoven threads in a tapestry that required constant attention. Ignore one, and the whole fabric risked unraveling. This was the quiet lesson the Sumerians had embedded into their myths, one that survives even today if we know where and how to look. That power without wisdom leads to collapse, that creation is a process, not a gift, and that survival is never permanent, only maintained. The story of humanity after the flood was no longer a narrative of direct divine collaboration, but of inherited responsibility. The same responsibility that the first kings of Eridu, the first laboring gods, and the primordial Namu had recognized: to act, to sustain, and to remember. The world that emerged was alive with possibility, yet fraught with risk, and the echoes of that first age, carved into clay so long ago, whispered across millennia, reminding anyone willing to listen that existence is fragile, creation is iterative, and balance is eternal. As the centuries unfolded, human civilization grew more complex, yet the memory of the primordial age persisted in subtle ways. Festivals, rituals, and seasonal observances were not mere superstition. They were acts of remembrance, encoded in practice to honor the structure of the cosmos itself. Every canal dug, every field planted, every temple raised was a reflection of the ancient truth: that the world existed in layers, that order depended on careful attention, and that humanity's survival required collaboration with both the divine and natural forces. The great cities of Mesopotamia, Uruk, Lagash, flourished not only because of human ingenuity, but because the wisdom of the old gods had been transmitted through priests and scribes. Knowledge was sacred: the secrets of irrigation, the timing of planting and harvest, the calculation of celestial cycles. Enki's influence endured in every clever engineering solution, every system of record keeping, every understanding of how water shaped life. Even as Enlil's power became more distant and judgmental, the human role in maintaining balance grew clearer. Civilization became a negotiation with the universe, a careful partnership between mortal skill and cosmic law. And yet, the legacy of the antediluvian age, the era of the impossibly long-lived kings, continued to inspire awe and fear. These figures, though mythological, were remembered as models of a different temporal order, one in which humans could inhabit a closer connection to the divine. Their reigns were symbolic reminders that the world once operated under different principles. Time was fluid, mortality less absolute, and the boundary between gods and humans permeable. Stories of these rulers circulated in temple schools, sung in hymns, and recorded on clay tablets, embedding a sense of continuity and sacred history in the human psyche. But as human history progressed, so too did the tension between ambition and survival. Empires rose and fell. Floods and droughts claimed lives and cities, and wars reshaped borders. In each crisis, the lessons of the past were tested. The myths of Namu, Enki, Enlil, and the Anunnaki were not merely tales. They were manuals for understanding cause and effect, for recognizing the consequences of neglecting cosmic balance. They taught that floods could wipe out civilizations not because gods were capricious, but because humans had failed to respect the structure sustaining life. The rivers, the earth, the laws embedded in creation itself, in temples across Mesopotamia. Priests continued to study and interpret these myths, seeking guidance for kings and citizens alike. They observed celestial movements to predict seasonal shifts, monitored the rivers to forecast floods, and instructed rulers in the ethical and practical duties of governance. Even the Anunnaki, once feared as judges of the dead, were invoked as reminders that destiny was intertwined with behavior and foresight, not arbitrary decree. Humanity's survival was tied to knowledge, diligence, and respect for the patterns established at the dawn of creation. Meanwhile, human innovation continued to accelerate. New technologies, new crafts, and new systems of organization allowed societies to thrive in ways that the earliest Sumerians could only have imagined. Yet these advancements always returned, consciously or unconsciously, to the original principles: water management, agricultural mastery, and the maintenance of social and cosmic balance. In every temple, city, and field, the echoes of the first collaboration between gods and humans resonated. And so, over millennia, a layered understanding of existence emerged. The primordial waters of Namu, the violent separation of heaven and earth by Enlil, the clever interventions of Enki, the judgment of the Anunnaki, and the extraordinary rulers of the antediluvian age, all became part of a continuum. Each generation built upon the legacy of those who came before, not as blind imitators, but as participants in an ongoing, delicate process of sustaining life in a world both generous and unforgiving. The Sumerians, in their earliest writings, had captured something profound. The universe is a system, and survival within it is a sacred responsibility. The story of human civilization, with all its triumphs and tragedies, is inseparable from this ancient framework. To understand the past is not only to trace the actions of gods and kings, but to recognize the enduring principles that govern existence itself. Balance, diligence, wisdom, and respect for the forces greater than ourselves. And it is in this recognition that the true depth of the Sumerian legacy reveals itself. Not in fantastical tales of gold-seeking aliens or cosmic engineering, but in the quiet, persistent understanding that life is sustained through awareness, care, and the tireless effort to maintain the fragile equilibrium that underlies everything that as human societies continued to develop. The influence of the ancient gods remained deeply woven into the very fabric of daily life. People did not see the divine as distant or abstract. The cosmos itself was alive with intelligence and intention, a network of forces that humans could interact with, honor, and sometimes mismanage at their peril. The temples were more than places of worship. They were centers of knowledge, technology, and administration, bridging the gap between the primordial patterns established by Namu and Enki and the practical necessities of survival in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Priests and scribes acted as intermediaries, not merely performing rituals, but interpreting the laws of the cosmos. They charted the stars, observed river levels, and encoded their findings in cuneiform. Their calculations and advice were essential for planting crops, building irrigation canals, and maintaining the delicate balance between human enterprise and natural forces. Every step forward in human ingenuity, from metallurgy to the invention of writing, was regarded as an extension of divine wisdom. It was Enki's gift of knowledge manifesting through human hands, ensuring that civilization could thrive without collapsing under the weight of chaos. Yet the Sumerian texts also preserved warnings, embedded in myth and ritual, about the dangers of arrogance and neglect. The stories of floods, celestial decrees, and divine judgment served as reminders that the ordered world was fragile. Humans, though imbued with the spark of divinity, were not omnipotent. They could cultivate the earth, build cities, and harness the flow of rivers, but they remained subject to the rules set by forces older and greater than themselves. When kings failed to uphold justice, when priests neglected their duties, or when communities ignored the rhythms of nature, the cosmos would reassert itself, sometimes gently, sometimes with catastrophic force. These lessons were encoded in rituals that marked the passage of time. Seasonal festivals celebrated the cycles of sowing and harvest, each tied to celestial observations. The moon god Nana's phases dictated the agricultural calendar, while the movements of the sun god Utu provided a framework for justice and order in civic life. Even the more enigmatic deities, like Inanna, were intimately linked to the ebb and flow of human experience, embodying both creation and destruction, love and war, fertility and famine. Through them, humans learned that balance was not static but dynamic, a constant negotiation with the divine and the natural world. And yet, the Sumerians also preserved space for mystery and imagination. Beyond the empirical observation of rivers, fields, and stars lay a realm that resisted full comprehension. The primordial waters of Namu remained a symbol of infinite potential, reminding mortals that even as they built temples and cities, the universe retained its capacity for renewal and transformation. In moments of contemplation, scholars and priests could sense the continuity between the undifferentiated waters of the beginning, the creation of Enki, and the lives they lived daily. They recognized that time itself was layered. The antediluvian era of impossibly long-lived kings, the post-flood period of human limitation, and their present age all coexisted as part of a single, vast cosmic tapestry. Stories of the antediluvian kings and the earliest gods were not merely history. They were practical tools for understanding life. Each myth, each ritual, each functioned as both narrative and guide, instructing humans on how to live, how to maintain harmony, and how to act responsibly within the order of creation. In this way, Sumerian cosmology was both grand and intimately practical. It connected the sweep of cosmic events to the day-to-day survival of ordinary people, embedding profound wisdom in the rhythms of agriculture, trade, governance, and social interaction. And in all of this, the Sumerians retained a sense of wonder and possibility. The universe, though ordered and structured, was not static. Just as Namu's primordial waters could give rise to new life, and Enki's clever interventions could transform labor into productivity, humans too were capable of innovation, adaptation, and renewal. Civilization was an ongoing experiment, a collaboration between mortals and the divine, a reflection of the eternal interplay between order and chaos, potential and manifestation. Through the texts, rituals, and myths preserved on clay tablets, the Sumerians left an enduring message that understanding the cosmos is inseparable from understanding oneself, that humanity's role is not to dominate or exploit, but to participate wisely in the grand patterns of existence, and that even the smallest actions can ripple through the complex network of forces that sustain life. It was a worldview simultaneously practical, spiritual, and deeply humane, a legacy that, even millennia later, continues to resonate with anyone who dares to look back to the origins of human thought, civilization, and cosmic awareness. The story of creation, divine labor, antediluvian kings, and the establishment of human society is not merely a distant memory. It is the foundation upon which all subsequent civilizations built their understanding of the world. And as we trace these patterns, we begin to see a remarkable continuity. The same principles that guided the first Sumerians, balance, observation, care, and respect for forces beyond human comprehension, remain relevant even today, a timeless thread connecting us to the very beginnings of human consciousness. As the Sumerians' understanding of the cosmos deepened, they began to codify not only the events of creation, but also the structures that would govern human society. The divine hierarchy mirrored earthly governance, a reflection of cosmic order in civic life. Kings were intermediaries between the mortal and the divine. Priests and scribes acted as custodians of sacred knowledge, and the labor of ordinary humans was understood as both practical necessity and participation in the maintenance of the universe. Every canal dug, every field irrigated, every brick laid for a temple was an echo of the divine labor that preceded humanity, a small act that sustained the balance between heaven, earth, and the air in between. Yet for all the structure and order, the cosmos was not static. The Sumerians recognized cycles of renewal and disruption, periods in which divine favor and natural abundance could ebb, giving way to scarcity and catastrophe. Floods, droughts, and disease were not mere accidents. They were manifestations of imbalance, reminders that humanity was never fully autonomous. The stories of the antediluvian kings, whose reigns spanned tens of thousands of years, were a lens through which the Sumerians understood the difference between divine time and human time. In the antediluvian age, beings could live in a closer proximity to gods, existing in a temporal framework that defied human limitations. After the flood, mortality became finite, human lifespans shortened, and the divine presence became less immediate. But the principles established by the first gods continued to shape the world. The transition from the antediluvian world to the post-flood era also marked a shift in human responsibility. Whereas earlier humans were created specifically to relieve the labor of the gods, the new generations were entrusted with stewardship over the world. The divine gifts, agriculture, animal husbandry, knowledge of water management were now tools that enabled humans to sustain life independently while still honoring the cosmic order. Humanity became co-creators in a sense, participants in the ongoing unfolding of reality. They were neither wholly divine nor fully powerless. They occupied a liminal space, capable of shaping their environment, but always constrained by the laws that the gods had set in motion. The Sumerian texts emphasize that the cosmos was not only material, but also moral. The gods were not impartial forces of nature. They possessed desires, intentions, and judgments. Justice, truth, and balance were principles that governed both the divine and mortal realms. Utu, the sun god, illuminated not just the earth, but also the moral fabric of existence. Inanna's dual nature reminded humans that creation and destruction were inseparable, and that understanding one required acknowledging the other. The deeds of kings, the conduct of priests, and the labor of ordinary people all contributed to maintaining or disrupting the equilibrium established by the primordial deities. As civilizations expanded, the Sumerians continued to document these lessons meticulously. Libraries of clay tablets accumulated, filled with hymns, myths, legal codes, astronomical observations, and practical instructions for agriculture and city management. Each tablet was a testament to the belief that knowledge, divinely inspired, carefully preserved, and applied with wisdom, was the key to survival and prosperity. The gods were never absent. They were embedded in every practice, every calculation, and every ritual. Humans learned to interpret their will, to anticipate disruptions, and to align their actions with the cosmic order. But there was also room for experimentation, adaptation, and even failure. The myths of Enki and Ninmah, with their iterative creation of humans, teach that perfection was not the starting point, but a process. The gods themselves adjusted, tested, and refined their work. Humans, by extension, were invited into this ongoing creative dialogue. The world was alive, mutable, and responsive. Understanding it required observation, intelligence, and humility. Even the smallest human action could resonate with the divine order, reinforcing or weakening the delicate balance that held the cosmos together. This worldview, complex, nuanced, and deeply intertwined with daily life, contrasts sharply with modern interpretations that oversimplify Sumerian beliefs into tales of alien visitors or fantastical engineering projects. The Sumerians' focus was not on sensational exploits, but on understanding existence, creating stability, and cultivating a sustainable relationship between the human and divine realms. Every narrative, every ritual, every observation preserved in their text served this purpose. The antediluvian kings, the primordial waters, the separation of heaven and earth, the creation of humanity, and the establishment of agriculture, all were part of a coherent, interconnected system that guided Sumerians in both thought and practice. Even today, as we excavate ruins, decipher tablets, and reconstruct their cosmology, the echoes of their worldview remain striking. The lessons of balance, stewardship, observation, and reverence for forces beyond human control resonate across millennia. By understanding how the Sumerians viewed their place in the cosmos, we gain not only historical insight, but also a profound perspective on the enduring challenges of living within a world that is vast, complex, and governed by principles both visible and unseen. The story, however, does not end with the establishment of human civilization. The texts hint at ongoing dramas, divine interventions, and the continuous interplay between gods and humans. Conflicts, innovations, and transformations were never fully resolved. The cosmos remained dynamic, a stage for new generations of deities and mortals to navigate the balance between order and chaos. This dynamic tension is the heart of Sumerian mythology, a reminder that creation is not a single event, but an ongoing process, one in which humans, though mortal, are intimately involved and forever shaped by the legacy of their divine predecessors. And as humanity settled into its new role within the ordered cosmos, the relationship between humans and gods became increasingly formalized. Temples rose in every city, dedicated not only to individual deities, but also to the maintenance of the cosmic balance itself. The Sumerians believed that these sacred structures were not mere monuments. They were active interfaces with the divine. Rituals, offerings, and festivals were not symbolic gestures alone. They were essential acts that sustained the flow of divine favor and kept chaos at bay. Priests became both spiritual leaders and technicians of cosmic order, mediators who ensured that the invisible laws established at the dawn of creation continued to operate without interruption. Yet, even within this structured system, unpredictability remained. The gods, for all their wisdom and power, were not infallible. The texts frequently depict quarrels, rivalries, and improvisations among deities. Enki's cleverness often led him to bend rules or reinterpret orders, while other gods reacted with jealousy or frustration. These divine interactions were mirrored in human society. Kings and officials were tasked not just with governing people, but also with navigating the unpredictable influence of the gods, interpreting their will, and adjusting human activity to prevent catastrophe. The Sumerians understood that cosmic harmony was delicate and required constant attention, observation, and action. The post-creation world, as described in the texts, was also one of experimentation and learning. Humans, newly formed from the sacred clay, were not perfect. They stumbled, miscalculated, and sometimes failed to fulfill the responsibilities bestowed upon them. The gods' guidance was necessary, but so was human initiative. The story of Enki and Ninmah's trial-and-error approach to creation reflected a broader principle. Creation itself was an ongoing process. The cosmos was not static. It evolved through interaction, adjustment, and collaboration between divine and mortal agents. Humanity's role was both practical and symbolic. They were the hands that executed the divine plan, the witnesses and participants in the unfolding drama of existence. Over time, humans developed cities, cultivated crops, and raised livestock, gradually mastering techniques that allowed them to thrive. The Sumerian texts attribute these advancements to divine intervention, yet they also recognize human ingenuity. Civilization was seen as a cooperative enterprise between gods and humans, with knowledge flowing from divine sources to guide practical application. The introduction of writing, particularly cuneiform, was a pivotal moment in this partnership. Writing allowed humans to record agreements, codify laws, preserve religious rituals, and transmit accumulated wisdom across generations. In essence, it enabled humanity to extend the principles of cosmic order into the temporal world, bridging the gap between the infinite time of the gods and the finite time of mortals. But the Sumerians were acutely aware that human advancement carried risk. Just as divine misjudgments could destabilize the cosmos, human errors could threaten the fragile balance established by the primordial deities. Floods, famine, and social upheaval were reminders that humans were not masters of creation. They were stewards, accountable to the laws and rhythms set by the gods. The memory of the antediluvian kings served as both inspiration and caution. The world of mythic time, with its extraordinary lifespans and direct divine oversight, had ended in catastrophe, signaling the dangers of imbalance and the consequences of failing to honor cosmic principles. Within this framework, the Anunnaki emerged, not as creators, but as administrators and enforcers of divine justice. Their domain was primarily the underworld and the determination of fate. They were the arbiters who ensured that human actions aligned with cosmic law, overseeing mortality, destiny, and the moral consequences of human behavior. Their presence underscored the principle that divine oversight was constant and that every human action resonated within a broader cosmic system. The Anunnaki were part of the divine bureaucracy that maintained the world order established by Namu, Enki, and the primordial gods, reminding humans that even as they gained autonomy, they remained participants in a structured universe. In this context, myths and rituals served a dual purpose. They were both narratives explaining the origins and functions of existence and practical guides for living within it. Observing the festivals, performing offerings, and interpreting omens were not mere religious formalities. They were ways of ensuring survival, prosperity, and alignment with the cosmic order. The cycles of nature, from the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates to the phases of the moon and the movement of the stars, were intricately tied to both divine will and human practice. The text meticulously recorded these patterns, reflecting the Sumerians' commitment to understanding and harmonizing with the forces that govern their world. The deeper lesson embedded in all these stories is clear. The Sumerians viewed the universe as a living, responsive system in which every being, divine or mortal, played a role. Human agency was real but bounded, significant but always accountable to principles larger than themselves. Creation was not a one-time event, but a continuous dialogue, a process that required attention, skill, and reverence. To thrive, humans had to learn, adapt, and participate responsibly in the maintenance of cosmic balance, carrying forward the legacy of the primordial gods while honoring the structures established in the earliest days of existence. This worldview, preserved in thousands of clay tablets and layered myths, offers a vision of humanity that is profoundly different from modern narratives of divine abandonment or alien manipulation. Humans are neither slaves nor mere bystanders. They are collaborators, stewards, and participants in an unfolding cosmic drama. Through careful observation, disciplined labor, and ritualized engagement with the divine, they maintain the fragile harmony of the universe and ensure the continuity of life and civilization itself. The Sumerian texts leave us with a sense of awe and responsibility, a reminder that the cosmos is not a static backdrop, but a dynamic, interactive system. Each action, whether by God or human, ripples through existence, shaping the patterns of life, fate, and order. The myths are more than stories. They are manuals for living within a universe that is both beautiful and precarious, a place where knowledge, diligence, and reverence determine the stability of all that exists as human civilization expanded. The Sumerians observed and recorded the ways in which divine influence manifested in the natural and social world. Every flood, every seasonal shift, every outbreak of disease or sudden bounty was interpreted not simply as random chance, but as a reflection of cosmic order and divine will. Priests and scholars meticulously chronicled these events, producing an extensive body of knowledge that served both as a historical record and as a guide for maintaining alignment with the gods. The boundaries between history, myth, and cosmology were fluid because all were part of the same unfolding reality in which humans and deities were deeply entwined. The Sumerians' approach to knowledge was practical, structured, and deeply spiritual at once. Mathematics, astronomy, and accounting were not merely tools for trade or construction. They were methods for understanding and participating in the divine order. Calculations of time, the cycles of the moon, and the positions of stars were essential not only for agriculture and administration, but also for rituals that preserved the favor of the gods. By carefully tracking celestial patterns, humans could anticipate events, prepare for floods, plant crops at the optimal moment, and maintain harmony between earthly and cosmic rhythms. The universe, in this view, was a complex machine that humans were meant to observe, understand, and act within, guided by divine principles. One particularly fascinating aspect of Sumerian cosmology is their conception of fate and divine justice. The Anunnaki, who had emerged as administrators of the underworld and arbiters of human destiny, ensured that the moral and spiritual dimensions of existence were respected. Humans were not merely subjects of divine labor assignment. They were accountable for their choices. Success and failure, prosperity and catastrophe, were interpreted through the lens of cosmic balance. Every action had consequences. Every misstep rippled through both the human and divine realms. This intricate ethical framework reinforced the understanding that human life, though mortal, was meaningful and capable of influencing the broader order of the universe. The creation myths, combined with practical knowledge and ritual practice, created a sophisticated cultural ecosystem. Humans were molded from the sacred clay of the Abzu, endowed with divine essence, and tasked with sustaining creation through work and devotion. They were educated through experience, ritual, and observation, gradually mastering the arts of agriculture, construction, governance, and craft. Divine guidance was always present, but human initiative was essential. This cooperative model between gods and humans provided both spiritual significance and practical efficiency, ensuring that civilization could flourish while remaining in harmony with cosmic laws. Over centuries, Sumerian civilization evolved into a highly organized society with distinct social hierarchies, specialized labor, and extensive urban networks. Temples remained central hubs, but administration expanded into secular matters. Trade, infrastructure, and law were all infused with divine oversight. Kings, priests, and scribes acted as intermediaries between humans and gods, interpreting omens, enforcing justice, and maintaining the continuity of knowledge. The Sumerians understood that the cosmic order established at creation required vigilance and responsibility. Even a single mismanaged river or neglected ritual could threaten both human prosperity and divine favor. Interestingly, the texts reveal a deep awareness of uncertainty and contingency. Even with divine assistance, humans face challenges that require judgment, creativity, and adaptability. The myths emphasize that life is a process of continuous adjustment, trial, and learning, a theme echoed in the stories of Enki and Ninmah, who refined their creations through experimentation. Humanity's position, therefore, was both empowered and precarious, endowed with intelligence, skill, and sacred purpose, yet dependent on their alignment with a universe that demanded attentiveness and care. The Sumerians also recognized the interdependence of all things: humans, gods, natural forces, and time itself. Cosmic, earthly, and social systems were intertwined, each affecting the others. Agriculture depended on the proper flow of water, which depended on divine favor. City governance relied on both human skill and celestial guidance. Health and prosperity were linked to ritual observance and moral behavior. This holistic worldview fostered a sense of connection and responsibility that extended far beyond the individual, encompassing family, community, environment, and cosmos. By studying these texts, we gain insight not only into the Sumerians' myths, but into the principles that guided their civilization. Their stories are not mere fantasies. They are frameworks for understanding existence, blending theology, ethics, natural observation, and human ingenuity. The narrative of creation, the establishment of divine hierarchies, and the origins of humanity form a cohesive vision, one in which every being, human or divine, plays a critical role in sustaining the delicate balance of reality. Even as time passed and civilizations rose and fell, the echoes of these beliefs persisted. Later Mesopotamian cultures, the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, absorbed, adapted, and elaborated upon these early Sumerian ideas. Yet the earliest texts retain a unique clarity, presenting a cosmos that begins with a single, unified source. Namu flows through the separation of heaven and earth by Enlil and continues with the emergence of humans, divine oversight, and the practical maintenance of life and order. This vision predates, and in many ways surpasses, the simplified narratives of gods as alien visitors or cosmic engineers that have captivated modern imagination, at its heart. The Sumerian worldview is a profound meditation on the responsibilities and potential of humanity. Created from the same primordial substance as the gods, humans were entrusted with sustaining the order of existence, participating actively in the maintenance and continuation of life, civilization, and cosmic harmony. Through work, ritual, learning, and ethical conduct, humanity was empowered to bridge the gap between mortal limitations and divine principles. And in this delicate interplay between gods and humans, chaos and order, potential and reality, the story of Sumeria and of humanity itself continues to unfold as Sumerian civilization matured. Their understanding of time, space, and divinity became increasingly nuanced. They began to see history not merely as a sequence of events, but as a layered continuum, with each generation connected to the cosmic order established at creation. The reigns of kings, the cycles of the seasons, and the movements of celestial bodies were all interwoven into a single, coherent framework. This understanding informed everything from governance and law to ritual practice and city planning. Temples became centers of both spiritual and practical administration. They were not simply places of worship, but hubs where knowledge was gathered, recorded, and transmitted. Scribes, trained in these temple schools, became the custodians of wisdom, mastering cuneiform writing to preserve myths, laws, and records of astronomical observations. Their role was crucial. By documenting the alignment between earthly and divine patterns, they ensured that humanity remained in harmony with cosmic forces. These scribes were also innovators, capable of calculating irrigation schedules, predicting flooding events, and developing sophisticated economic records. Through their work, they maintained the delicate balance between human effort and divine will, between survival and prosperity, in addition to practical knowledge. The myths themselves served as moral and philosophical guides. The tales of Enki, Ninmah, and other deities contained layers of meaning, teaching lessons about adaptability, problem-solving, cooperation, and respect for the order of things. The experiments in human creation, where beings were molded with diverse abilities and limitations, underscored the Sumerian recognition that society needed to accommodate all forms of life. Those who could not perform agricultural labor still had value, reinforcing an ethic of inclusion and social responsibility. In this way, myths functioned as both cosmology and pedagogy, shaping cultural norms while explaining the universe's origins. The Sumerians also developed a keen awareness of mortality and the afterlife. While the primordial deities and early kings operated on vastly extended timelines, humans were finite and life was precarious. The Anunnaki, assigned to judge the dead, ensured that moral and ethical dimensions were integral to existence. The underworld was a realm of accountability, where actions in life had consequences beyond immediate experience. This dual perspective, acknowledging both divine oversight and human responsibility, created a worldview in which each action, each choice had significance, and where participation in the divine order was both privilege and duty. The influence of natural phenomena on Sumerian thought cannot be overstated. Living between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians witnessed firsthand the life-giving and destructive powers of water. Floods could nourish the land with fertile silt or devastate entire settlements, reminding humans of their dependence on the gods and the delicate balance of order and chaos. The careful management of rivers, canals, and irrigation systems was more than practical necessity. It was an enactment of cosmic principles, a physical expression of maintaining the order established at creation. Humans, through labor and ingenuity, were participants in the ongoing act of creation, fulfilling the roles assigned to them by the divine hierarchy. The cities themselves embodied this cosmology. Each urban center had a sacred function, reflecting both its divine patronage and its practical purpose. Eridu, as the first city, represented the intersection of divine and mortal spheres, where kingship and civilization first emerged. Badtira, associated with metallurgy, symbolized technological transformation and human mastery over material resources. Larik, with its focus on healing and purification, highlighted the integration of spiritual and physical well-being. Sippa, dedicated to Utu, the sun god, emphasized justice, law, and the illumination of truth. Shurapak, the final pre-flood city, symbolized both culmination and transition, the last bastion before the cataclysmic reset of the flood. Together, these cities created a network of sacred and functional spaces, each contributing to the stability and prosperity of the Sumerian world. The Sumerians' conception of human purpose was deeply intertwined with this urban and cosmic framework. Humans were not passive recipients of divine favor. They were active agents responsible for sustaining civilization, honoring the gods, and maintaining cosmic order. Agriculture, craft, governance, and ritual were all part of a larger system in which human action had profound significance. The myths, city structures, and rituals reinforced a vision of life in which labor, knowledge, ethics, and spirituality were inseparable, each reflecting the larger order established by the primordial deities. Even after the flood, when the world was renewed and kingship and civilization had to be rebuilt, the principles established in these early Sumerian narratives persisted. Knowledge, ritual, and governance continued to flow from the divine to the human realm, preserving the lessons of creation, cosmic order, and the responsibilities of human beings. The pre-flood epoch, with its extraordinary lifespans, divine collaboration, and experimental approach to creation, remained a foundational reference point, a mythic ideal against which later experiences and histories were measured. Through these texts, we glimpse a world in which humans and gods coexisted in closer proximity than is imaginable today, where labor and creativity were shared responsibilities, and where understanding the cosmos was inseparable from understanding oneself. The Sumerians' narratives offer a vision of existence that is both practical and profoundly philosophical, a universe in which order emerges from potential, where humans are co-creators in sustaining life, and where the divine is always present but never wholly removed from the work, struggles, and triumphs of mortal existence as time progressed. The Sumerians' understanding of their own place in the cosmos deepened, and their myths began to reflect not only the origins of the world, but also the cycles that governed it. The passage of days and seasons, the rise and fall of rivers, and the interplay between life and death became inseparable from divine narratives. Each aspect of the natural world was linked to the actions of deities, ensuring that humans recognized both the fragility of existence and the guiding hand of the cosmic order. The calendar, for instance, was not a mere tool for organizing planting and harvest, It was a sacred framework. The movements of the moon, overseen by Nana, the moon god, marked months and rituals, while Utu, the sun god, regulated days, illuminating the world with truth and justice. Observing celestial patterns allowed the Sumerians to align human activities with divine rhythms, ensuring that work, worship, and governance flowed in harmony with cosmic law. This synchronization of earthly and heavenly patterns underscored the belief that human prosperity depended upon respect for divine structure and natural order. Within this structure, the role of kings and rulers was not only political, but profoundly spiritual. A king's authority derived directly from the gods, and their responsibility extended beyond mere administration. They were custodians of cosmic and social balance. By maintaining temples, overseeing agriculture, and implementing law, kings ensured that humans fulfilled their intended roles in the ongoing work of creation. The exceptional lifespans of the pre-flood rulers symbolized not only divine favor, but also the continuity of order across generations, establishing a model for governance deeply intertwined with sacred principles. Humanity, although subordinate to the divine, was not passive. The Sumerians conceived of humans as co-workers in the maintenance of the cosmos. By cultivating fields, building cities, tending flocks, and performing ritual observances, humans actively participated in sustaining the order the gods had established. In this sense, the act of labor itself was sanctified, a bridge between mortal effort and divine intention. Each brick laid, each canal dug, each seed sown was a small reflection of the creative and organizing forces that had shaped the world from the beginning. Yet the myths also acknowledge the limits and imperfections of human and divine action. The experiments in human creation, with beings of varying abilities, demonstrated that life was not a static achievement, but a dynamic process requiring continual adjustment. The gods themselves were not infallible. They learned, adapted, and collaborated, responding to unforeseen challenges. Humans, in turn, were required to navigate the constraints of their nature while striving to uphold the principles of cosmic order. This interplay of divine guidance, human initiative, and natural forces created a deeply interdependent system, emphasizing responsibility, creativity, and moral accountability. The Sumerians also recognized that the cosmos was not fixed but cyclical. Floods, droughts, seasonal changes, and celestial movements reminded humans and gods alike that creation required ongoing attention. The Great Flood, preserved in myth, was not merely a story of destruction. It was a reaffirmation of the delicate balance between order and chaos, a lesson in vigilance and humility. Survival after the deluge reinforced the principle that humans and gods shared responsibility for the maintenance of life, that the world's stability depended on cooperation, foresight, and respect for cosmic law. Over time, these narratives influenced every aspect of Sumerian culture. Law codes, such as those of Uarnemu, reflected divine principles applied to human society. Agricultural practices, urban planning, and temple rituals were all modeled on the patterns set forth in the myths. The stories of Enki, Ninmah, and the early kings were not merely entertainment. They were blueprints for living in accordance with the universe's inherent order. Every act of creation, governance, or ritual was an attempt to mirror the cosmic processes that had brought the world into existence, ensuring that human civilization would remain aligned with the forces that governed life, death, and the unfolding of time. Even as centuries passed and the Sumerian civilization evolved, these foundational myths continued to shape thought and practice. Later Mesopotamian cultures, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, built upon these stories, preserving their essence while adding new layers of interpretation. The primordial waters, the acts of Enki and Ninmah, the extraordinary reigns of the pre-flood kings, and the sacred cities remain central symbols of humanity's relationship with the divine and the cosmos. They serve as reminders that the universe is not a static backdrop for human life, but an intricate system in which every action, whether mortal or divine, resonates across time and space. In this way, the Sumerians offer us more than ancient stories. They provide a vision of a universe where life, labor, and wisdom are inseparable, where humans are both created and responsible, and where understanding the past is essential to navigating the present. Their myths, carefully preserved on clay tablets, speak across millennia, inviting us to consider our own place within the vast, ordered, yet ever-changing cosmos, and to reflect on the delicate balance between creation, responsibility, and the pursuit of knowledge as human civilization grew. So too did the complexity of the divine hierarchy and the roles that each god played in maintaining the balance of existence. The Sumerians understood that the cosmos was vast and multifaceted, and thus they assigned specialized duties to different deities, each overseeing a distinct aspect of life or nature. Enki, for instance, continued to serve as the steward of the sweet waters of the Abzu, ensuring the fertility of the land and the well-being of humanity. But alongside him, other gods were given responsibility over aspects of human life that were no less essential. Nana oversaw the rhythm of time and the calendar. Utu upheld truth and justice through the illumination of day, and Inanna wielded both the nurturing and destructive forces that shape society and conflict alike. The Sumerians saw these divine roles as reflecting the interdependence of all things. Humans relied on the gods not merely for life-giving sustenance, but for guidance in moral, social, and cosmic matters. Every act of worship, every offering, every ritual was a way to reinforce this interconnection, ensuring that the delicate equilibrium of the universe remained intact. Temples were constructed as microcosms of the cosmos itself, places where the boundaries between the divine and human realms were thinnest, where communication with the gods could be direct and immediate. Through these spaces, humans participated in the ongoing work of creation, acting as mediators and caretakers within the grand design of existence. Yet despite the apparent order, the Sumerian myths also acknowledge the presence of chaos, unpredictability, and tension. The cosmos was not a simple clockwork mechanism, but a dynamic system in which forces of potential disorder required constant attention. Floods, droughts, storms, and other natural phenomena were interpreted not only as physical events, but as manifestations of divine will and cosmic imbalance. When humans failed to maintain proper rituals, or when divine displeasure arose, the consequences could be catastrophic. These events were understood as lessons, reminders that the harmony of existence was fragile and that vigilance, devotion, and wisdom were necessary to sustain life. This understanding extended to the social and political sphere as well. Kings and rulers were expected to embody the principles of the cosmos, upholding justice, ensuring fairness, and maintaining the well-being of their people. Their authority, granted from heaven, was not absolute but conditional upon their ability to preserve order and act in accordance with divine guidance. The extraordinary lifespans and semi-divine nature of the pre-flood rulers served as metaphors for this principle, illustrating that leadership was not only a matter of earthly power, but also of alignment with cosmic law. These rulers were living symbols of the intersection between human action and divine will, bridging the realms of mortality and eternity. Over time, human innovation, guided by divine inspiration, transformed the natural landscape into cultivated fields, organized cities, and complex infrastructure. The Sumerians' meticulous understanding of irrigation, agriculture, metallurgy, and architecture was inseparable from their religious worldview. Their technology was not merely practical. It was sacred, a means of participating in the ongoing creation and maintenance of the world. By channeling water from rivers, shaping clay into bricks, and crafting tools from metal, humans enacted the divine order on the terrestrial plane, ensuring that life could flourish in harmony with the gods' design. Yet, even as humans mastered these techniques, they remained dependent upon the divine, and the myths preserve this tension. The creation of humans as a labor force for the gods, though practical, emphasize humanity's role as both servant and participant in the cosmic order. Humans were imbued with intelligence, creativity, and moral agency, but their existence was inseparable from the structure and maintenance of the world established by the gods. Work, law, agriculture, and ritual were not separate domains, but threads in a single, interwoven tapestry connecting the mortal and divine realms. The Sumerians also reflected on the impermanence of human life and the inevitability of mortality. Even those pre-flood rulers who lived for tens of thousands of years could not escape the eventual limits imposed by cosmic law. Death, decay, and the cycles of renewal were as integral to the divine plan as creation itself. The myths depict the gods as both benefactors and enforcers of these natural laws, guiding humanity while simultaneously reminding them of their mortality and dependence. Life, then, was a sacred responsibility, a chance to participate in creation, sustain order, and honor the intricate design of existence, while remaining ever aware of the fragility of that order. Through these narratives, the Sumerians created a worldview that integrated the material, the social, and the spiritual. They understood that the success of human society, the fertility of the land, the regularity of seasons, and the stability of the cosmos were interconnected, and that neglect or imbalance in any domain could reverberate across all others. Their myths were not simply stories. They were frameworks for understanding the universe, instructions for living in alignment with its principles, and meditations on the responsibilities and limitations of both gods and humans. This worldview persisted for centuries, evolving and adapting as new generations of priests, scribes, and rulers interpreted the old myths for their own times. Temples continued to serve as focal points for maintaining the divine order. Kingship continued to link human authority with cosmic law, and the stories of creation, the flood, and the interactions between gods and humans informed social norms, moral expectations, and cultural identity. The Sumerian vision of a universe sustained through cooperation, wisdom, and diligent labor offered a profound lesson. That existence itself was not a random or chaotic accident, but a carefully maintained balance, requiring participation, responsibility, and reverence from all who dwelt within it. As the Sumerian civilization matured, these myths became more than mere cosmological explanations. They were guides to daily life, governance, and the moral order. The narratives of gods laboring, humans assisting, and kings ruling under divine mandate were mirrored in the organization of cities and the rituals performed within them. Every act of construction, every allocation of water, every legal decision was imbued with cosmic significance. Temples were not merely houses of worship. They were administrative centers, archives of sacred knowledge, and laboratories of divine human collaboration. Within their walls, scribes recorded transactions, rituals, and observations with painstaking care, believing that the written word itself preserved the balance between heaven and earth. The social hierarchy reflected this cosmic structure. Priests acted as intermediaries between humans and gods, ensuring that rituals were performed correctly and that divine favor was maintained. Kings were divinely sanctioned stewards of human society, accountable not only to their subjects but to the gods themselves. Craftsmen, farmers, and laborers carried out their work in recognition of their place within the grand design, understanding that the proper functioning of society was a reflection of cosmic harmony. Even seemingly mundane tasks, like tending to a field or repairing a canal, were imbued with sacred purpose because they sustained the order upon which life itself depended. The Sumerians also recognized the fragility of this order. Catastrophic floods, unpredictable droughts, and disease reminded humans that divine favor was conditional and that the balance of creation required constant attention. In their myths, these events were not random disasters, but consequences of imbalance or neglect, calls to restore proper observance of cosmic law. Rituals of purification, offerings, and recitation of sacred texts were tools for re-establishing equilibrium, reaffirming the connection between human action and divine will. Even the human experience of time was shaped by these cosmological principles. The extreme lifespans of pre-flood kings and the mythic timelines of creation emphasized that time was fluid, varying according to the state of the cosmos. Life before the flood existed in a different temporal reality, one in which divine and human realms intertwined freely and where the ordinary constraints of mortality were less rigid. After the flood, as the world settled into a more structured and familiar pattern, time became more linear, mortality more absolute, and the distance between gods and humans greater. This distinction underscored the transition from a mythological age into a historical one, from a cosmos freshly emerging from potential into one governed by laws, cycles, and order. That humanity's role within this framework was both humble and profound. Mortals were not merely passive observers. They were active participants in the maintenance of the world. The creation of humans from primordial clay was not just a utilitarian act to relieve the labor of gods. It was an invitation into the ongoing process of creation, an assertion that humans could wield creativity, ingenuity, and moral agency while remaining tethered to the divine order. Work, innovation, and ritual were expressions of this responsibility, acts that reflected an understanding that life's abundance was a shared endeavor between gods and humans. As cities grew and agriculture flourished, humans became increasingly capable of shaping their environment, yet they never lost sight of the divine context that gave them the knowledge and resources to do so. Enki's gifts, the understanding of irrigation, the knowledge of crops, the wisdom of construction, were not mere technologies, but instruments of cosmic balance, designed to ensure that humans could sustain themselves while honoring the god's order. The Sumerians viewed civilization itself as a sacred project, an extension of divine creation that required wisdom, foresight, and diligence to maintain. The myths also reveal an acute awareness of human limitations. Even with divine guidance, humans were fallible and vulnerable, subject to the whims of nature, the contingencies of fate, and the moral expectations of the gods. Errors in judgment, failures to perform rituals correctly, or neglect of societal duties could provoke divine displeasure, reinforcing the idea that life stability depended on vigilance and adherence to the established order. In this sense, mythology served as both instruction and warning, a way to instill ethical and practical principles through stories that connected the mortal and divine realms. Interestingly, the Sumerian narratives do not portray creation as a one-time, perfect event. Instead, creation is iterative, adaptive, and ongoing. Enki and Ninmah's experimental crafting of humans illustrates a process of trial and error, adjustment, and refinement, emphasizing that the cosmos and human society are not static, but require continuous attention and care. This dynamic view of creation contrasts sharply with later interpretations that depict the act of creation as immediate and flawless, highlighting the Sumerians' nuanced understanding of both divine and human agency. Even the seemingly fantastical aspects of the myths, the extraordinary lifespans of kings, the ability of gods to interact directly with humans, the primordial floods, and cosmic separations, serve a deeper purpose. They encode lessons about responsibility, interdependence, and the limits of power, both mortal and divine. They remind the listener that existence is a complex interplay of forces, that order must be actively maintained, and that humanity occupies a unique space at the intersection of material and spiritual realms. These narratives, preserved in cuneiform tablets and recited by generations of priests and scholars, provide a window into a worldview in which the cosmos, society, and human life were inseparably intertwined. They reveal a civilization acutely attuned to the environment, conscious of the fragility of existence, and committed to maintaining harmony through knowledge, labor, and ritual. By exploring these texts, we begin to see the Sumerians not merely as primitive ancestors, but as sophisticated thinkers who sought to understand their place in the universe and the responsibilities that came with that understanding. The mythic age, the pre-flood world, and the emergence of cities, agriculture, and governance all reflect a vision in which humans, gods, and the cosmos are bound together in a delicate and ongoing relationship. Each narrative thread reinforces the principle that life is sustained through cooperation, awareness, and adherence to a moral and cosmic order. This perspective shaped not only Sumerian culture, but also the foundations of later Mesopotamian civilizations, influencing their religion, politics, and understanding of human potential and responsibility as civilization progressed. The Sumerians' understanding of the cosmos continued to expand, becoming increasingly intertwined with their daily lives. The gods, once seen as distant and primordial forces, were now mapped onto every aspect of the environment, human society, and the natural cycles that governed existence. Enki, having set humans upon the earth and provided them with knowledge, continued to serve as a bridge between the divine and mortal realms. He became the patron of artisans, scribes, and builders, guiding human ingenuity while ensuring that the balance between creativity and responsibility was maintained. The process of civilization, as described in the texts, was gradual and cumulative. Initially, humans relied on divine gifts like grain and sheep, but over time they learned to cultivate the land, manage irrigation, and organize settlements. Each technological and social advance was framed as an extension of the divine order, a way for humans to participate in the ongoing maintenance of the cosmos. Fields had to be tended with care, canals dug with precision, cities planned according to principles that mirrored the cosmic structure. The act of building, of transforming the natural landscape into a habitable environment, was sacred work, a reflection of humanity's role as co-creators alongside the gods. Yet the Sumerians were keenly aware that human effort alone could not sustain the world. Natural forces, floods, droughts, disease, remained unpredictable and uncontrollable, serving as constant reminders of humanity's dependence on divine oversight. It was not enough to labor tirelessly. Humans also had to maintain the proper rituals, honor the gods, and respect the cycles of nature. Temples became both spiritual centers and hubs of administration, places where divine law and human governance intersected. Priests, scribes, and rulers ensured that offerings were made, laws were enforced, and knowledge was preserved. One of the most striking aspects of the Sumerian worldview was their sophisticated concept of time and historical memory. They distinguished sharply between epochs: the mythic pre-flood era of the extraordinary kings, the establishment of cities and agricultural systems, and the human historical period that followed. These temporal divisions were not merely chronological markers, but expressed a theological and cosmological understanding of reality itself. Time was layered, with different principles governing existence in each epoch. The pre-flood kings' extreme lifespans symbolized an age when the divine and mortal realms were closely intertwined, while post-flood kings operated within the constraints of ordinary human experience. This layered conception of time reinforced the Sumerians' understanding of their own place in history. Humanity existed within a continuum that began with primordial waters, flowed through divine creation, and continued into the establishment of cities and civilization. Each generation inherited both the material world shaped by their ancestors and the moral and cosmic order established by the gods. Knowledge, especially written knowledge, became crucial for preserving this inheritance. Cuneiform tablets, meticulously inscribed with myths, laws, and administrative records, were tools for maintaining continuity and ensuring that divine and human responsibilities were upheld. The Sumerians also exhibited remarkable awareness of human diversity and the variety of roles necessary for society to function. The Enki and Ninmah texts, with their accounts of humans created with different abilities, illustrate a sophisticated understanding of social inclusion and practical adaptation. Even those who could not perform traditional labor had value and purpose, demonstrating that every human being, regardless of ability, had a place in the cosmic and social order. This approach emphasized the interconnectedness of all individuals and highlighted the principle that harmony and stability depended on recognizing and integrating the contributions of every member of society. Through these narratives, the Sumerians conveyed lessons that were practical, ethical, and spiritual. They reinforced the idea that human life, though fragile and limited, was meaningful and capable of participating in divine processes. The myths did not depict humans as mere pawns of the gods, but as active collaborators, entrusted with responsibilities that required judgment, skill, and moral awareness. In essence, Sumerian cosmology and mythology provided a comprehensive framework for understanding reality, combining explanations of natural phenomena, societal organization, and human purpose into a coherent worldview. Even as the pantheon expanded and stories grew more complex, the central themes remained consistent: the primacy of water as the source of life, the layered structure of the cosmos with heaven, earth, and the intermediary realm, the ongoing maintenance of order through divine and human action, and the intricate relationship between creation, labor, and responsibility. These motifs permeated Sumerian thought, shaping not only religion and mythology, but also law, governance, and education in practical terms. The lessons of these myths guided everything from urban planning to agricultural practices. Canals were dug to channel water efficiently, reflecting the same principles that govern the cosmic flow of the Abzu. Crops were rotated and tended in accordance with divine guidance, ensuring sustenance and stability. Cities were constructed with temples at their center, symbolizing the integration of spiritual and civic life. Even the selection and training of rulers and officials followed patterns derived from mythic precedents, emphasizing wisdom, justice, and the ability to maintain harmony between human and divine interests. The cumulative effect of these practices was a society in which mythology, religion, and governance were inseparable from practical knowledge and technical skill. The Sumerians understood that their survival and prosperity depended on the precise application of both spiritual insight and empirical observation. Water had to flow, crops had to grow, and temples had to stand, all under the vigilant oversight of those trained to interpret the will of the gods and implement it on earth. This deep integration of myth, practice, and moral responsibility is what allowed Sumerian civilization to endure and flourish for millennia. Even as later cultures adapted and transformed these narratives, the foundational principles remained remarkably resilient. That humanity exists within a cosmos created by divine forces, that labor and knowledge are sacred acts, and that every action, whether mundane or grand, participates in maintaining the balance of existence itself, be why understanding the Sumerian vision of the cosmos. We gain insight not only into ancient Mesopotamia, but also into the enduring questions that have preoccupied humans for millennia. Where do we come from? What is our purpose? How do we navigate the delicate balance between the natural and the divine, between survival and transcendence? The answers the Sumerians provided are complex, nuanced, and deeply human, reflecting a civilization that sought to harmonize knowledge, morality, and practical life into a single, coherent understanding of the universe. With the foundation of human society established, the Sumerian texts turned their attention to the development of cities, kingship, and the intricate relationships between gods and mortals. The narrative emphasizes that the first cities were not simply human inventions, but divine gifts, created in coordination with the gods to provide order, stability, and a locus for ritual, governance, and knowledge. Each city had its patron deity, whose presence ensured both spiritual protection and the proper functioning of the material world. Eridu, as we have seen, was the prototype, founded upon the cosmic waters of the Abzu, the intersection where heaven's order touched the fertile plains below. The city's design reflected the Sumerians' understanding of cosmic harmony. Temples at the center, surrounded by administrative structures, markets, homes, and cultivated fields. Every street, canal, and courtyard was organized to mirror the order established by the gods, creating a microcosm of the larger universe. As cities developed, the institution of kingship became a central feature of Sumerian civilization. Kings were not merely political leaders. They were intermediaries between humans and gods, chosen to execute divine will on earth. The texts describe kingship as descending from heaven, a sacred transfer of authority that predated the establishment of permanent dynasties. The pre-flood kings, with their extraordinary lifespans, illustrate the Sumerian understanding of time and existence as fundamentally different in those early epics. These rulers were closer to the divine, operating in a temporal framework where years stretched far beyond ordinary human comprehension. Their extraordinary longevity symbolized the deep connection between divine authority and human governance, emphasizing that rulership was a sacred responsibility rather than a mere exercise of power. Each city and its ruler had a specific function within the broader cosmic and social order. Bad Tibera, associated with metallurgy, became the center for crafting and technological innovation. The mastery of metalworking was seen as a divine gift, transforming human society by providing tools for agriculture, construction, and defense. The narrative emphasizes that these skills were taught by the gods, particularly Enki, who imparted knowledge to humans in a manner that blended practical instruction with sacred wisdom. Sipper, dedicated to Utu, the sun god, functioned as a center of law, justice, and timekeeping. Here, scribes were trained, legal codes were preserved, and society learned to regulate itself according to divine principles mirrored in cosmic cycles. Larik, Shurapak, and other cities each had their own specialized roles, demonstrating that civilization was a complex, interdependent system in which each urban center contributed to the stability and prosperity of the whole. In the midst of this urban development, humanity's relationship with the gods remained deeply interactive. The texts emphasize that the divine world was not distant or aloof. Gods walked among humans, observing, instructing, and intervening as necessary. Rituals, offerings, and temple services were vital mechanisms for maintaining favor and ensuring that the cosmos continued to operate smoothly. The Sumerians perceived a universe in which divine satisfaction directly influenced natural events, such as the success of crops, the behavior of rivers, or the occurrence of floods and droughts. The balance of order and chaos was fragile, and human attention to the gods' desires was essential for survival. The narrative also explores the emergence of specialized knowledge, such as writing, astronomy, and law. Writing, initially developed for administrative purposes, became the medium through which humans could record history, preserve rituals, and communicate with the divine. Astronomical observations were not merely scientific, but deeply tied to religious and agricultural practices. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars were interpreted as expressions of divine will, guiding planting cycles, festivals, and governance. Law codes, temple regulations, and civic decrees were likewise framed as extensions of divine order, demonstrating the Sumerians' awareness that a stable society required the integration of ethical, practical, and spiritual governance. Another fascinating aspect of Sumerian thought revealed in the texts is the nuanced understanding of human potential and limitation. While humans were created to relieve the gods of labor, they were also granted the capacity for ingenuity, problem-solving, and cultural development. The Enki and Ninman narratives highlight that humans, even in their imperfections or physical limitations, were valued contributors to society. The gods' experimental approach to creation suggests that diversity, adaptability, and inclusion were fundamental principles guiding both the cosmic and social order. Every human had a role, and understanding one's purpose was a matter of both divine insight and personal effort. The Sumerian worldview, as reconstructed from these texts, emphasizes balance, responsibility, and cooperation. Humans were neither fully divine nor wholly subordinate. They existed in a liminal space where effort, morality, and ritual could influence both their material success and their cosmic alignment. Civilization itself, from the construction of canals to the establishment of cities and the formulation of law, was a sacred endeavor, a reflection of the divine order on earth. Knowledge, labor, and ritual were inseparable. To cultivate fields without honoring the gods was incomplete, just as to perform rituals without sustaining society in practical ways was insufficient. Through this lens, the Sumerian texts offer profound insights into how early humans conceptualized the world, society, and their place within it. They demonstrate a civilization deeply aware of the interdependence of all things, gods, humans, nature, and time, and how each action reverberated through the cosmic and terrestrial realms. In essence, the Sumerians created a narrative framework that allowed them to understand existence in a way that combined myth, observation, and practical wisdom, integrating the divine into the everyday and positioning humanity as active participants in the ongoing maintenance of the cosmos, as civilization flourished under the guidance of the gods. The Sumerian texts describe the gradual emergence of organized religion, festivals, and complex social hierarchies. Temples became not just centers of worship, but hubs of administration, education, and culture. Each city's temple was dedicated to its patron deity, and these structures reflected both architectural sophistication and cosmic symbolism. Ziggurats, the massive step towers that reached toward the sky, were conceived as bridges between earth and heaven, physical embodiments of the connection between humans and divine forces. The highest levels of the ziggurats were considered the closest to the gods, where only priests and rulers could ascend, symbolizing a hierarchical access to sacred knowledge. Rituals and offerings were central to maintaining harmony between mortals and deities. The texts provide meticulous details about sacrifices, festivals, and ceremonial observances, showing a civilization acutely aware of the delicate balance between divine favor and worldly survival. Seasonal cycles, particularly the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, were understood not only as natural events, but as expressions of cosmic order. Properly observing these cycles through ritual ensured that the land remained fertile and the cities prosperous. Mistakes or negligence in these observances were believed to provoke divine displeasure, manifesting as droughts, failed harvests, or social unrest. Within this religious and social framework, kings functioned as both political and spiritual leaders. The pre-flood rulers' extraordinary lifespans reflected their liminal nature, part divine, part human, serving as conduits between eternal cosmic principles and the temporal, practical concerns of society. After the flood, the post-Diluvian king's lifespan shortened, and the human experience became more distinctly separated from the divine, yet the principle of kingship as a sacred institution remained. Kings were responsible for upholding justice, administering resources, and ensuring that humanity continued to follow the divine order established during the earliest periods of creation. The Sumerians also recorded the transmission of specialized knowledge from the gods to humanity. Enki, in particular, acted as a mediator between divine insight and practical human application. Through him, humans received knowledge of agriculture, animal husbandry, irrigation, architecture, medicine, and craftwork. This divine human collaboration was foundational to the development of cities, economies, and cultural sophistication. Humans were not passive recipients. They were active learners and implementers, using the divine guidance to create structured, resilient societies. Interestingly, the text suggests a constant dynamic between order and experimentation. While gods like Enki provided wisdom and guidance, human society and the divine hierarchy were understood as evolving systems. Trial and error, adaptation, and problem-solving were central to the Sumerian worldview. Creation itself was not a single flawless act, but an ongoing process that required adjustment, innovation, and vigilance. This perspective contrasts sharply with later rigidly deterministic interpretations, whether in mythological or pseudo-archaeological narratives. The Sumerians emphasized flexibility, creativity, and the interdependence of all beings in maintaining cosmic and social equilibrium. The narrative also preserves a keen understanding of human limitations and ethical responsibilities. While humans were capable of ingenuity and cultural achievement, they remained dependent on the divine for life-sustaining forces, guidance, and protection. This dependency did not imply passivity or inferiority. Rather, it created a moral and social framework in which humans were accountable for their actions, responsible for maintaining harmony with both natural and supernatural forces. Humans could shape their destinies through effort, learning, and ritual, but they always existed within the parameters set by the cosmos and the gods who governed it. Through the combination of cosmology, divine genealogy, and mythic narrative, the Sumerians created a worldview that integrated theology, ethics, and practical governance. Humanity was neither fully autonomous nor entirely subjugated. People occupied a middle space where knowledge, labor, and moral action determined both societal and cosmic stability. Civilizations, cities, kings, and priests were all participants in an ongoing dialogue between the divine and the mortal, an intricate interplay designed to maintain order in a universe that had been meticulously structured but still demanded constant care. That'd be why preserving these narratives on clay tablets. The Sumerians ensured that future generations would remember the origins of their world, their responsibilities, and the nature of the divine hierarchy. These texts were not mere stories. They were guides for living, instructions for sustaining civilization, and philosophical treatises on the nature of reality, time, and existence. They offer a glimpse into a worldview in which creation, human effort, and divine oversight were inseparable. A world where myth, history, and practical knowledge coexisted seamlessly, each reinforcing the other in the service of cosmic balance. The Sumerian texts, then, provide a foundation far richer and more complex than the simplified ancient astronaut interpretations. They describe a universe where humans are both humble and empowered, capable of innovation, but always linked to the forces that sustain life. Through these stories, we see the earliest human attempts to understand the cosmos, organize society, and embed ethical responsibility into every aspect of existence. Humanity's journey, as preserved in these tablets, is one of learning, adaptation, and continual engagement with the mysteries of creation, a journey that sets the stage for all later mythologies, philosophies, and civilizations as human societies developed under the guidance of the gods. The Sumerian texts portray an era of experimentation and expansion. The cities that had emerged from the guidance of the divine, Urdu, Badtara, Larik, Sapar, and Shurapak, were not just centers of population, but laboratories of civilization. Each city embodied a distinct aspect of culture, technology, and governance, reflecting both the practical needs of its inhabitants and the particular blessings or domains of its patron deity. Eridu, for instance, under the watchful eye of Enki, became the archetype of spiritual and intellectual advancement. Its temple, the Iabzu, symbolized the link between heaven, earth, and the subterranean waters, and priests and scribes worked tirelessly to maintain sacred knowledge, recording every detail of creation, divine intervention, and the earliest human activities. Bad Tibera, associated with craftsmanship and metallurgy, became the hub for technological innovation. Copper smelting, tool making, and construction techniques developed here under divine supervision, transforming raw natural resources into implements that could shape society. Through these practical skills, humans learned to impose order on the environment, mastering the rivers, the soil, and the materials of the land. The gods, while guiding and providing inspiration, allowed humans freedom to experiment, adjust, and improve upon the techniques they were given. This collaborative relationship was central to Sumerian thought. Humans were co-creators, not mere passive recipients of divine instruction. Lyric and Sapar represented other vital aspects of civilization. Lyric, though less well documented, was connected to healing, ritual purification, and maintaining social cohesion, reflecting an understanding that physical, moral, and spiritual well-being were all interdependent. Sapar, sacred to the sun god Utu, became the center for law, justice, and the careful tracking of time. Through astronomical observation and meticulous record-keeping, priests and scribes ensured that the cycles of day and night, the months and seasons, were aligned with both human activity and divine order. These cities collectively demonstrate that Sumerian society was not merely a collection of settlements, but a carefully structured, multi-layered civilization in which religious, technological, and administrative systems were deeply intertwined. The Sumerian texts describe a world in which humans and gods interacted more directly than in any later period. The gods' instructions, gifts, and oversight were constant, yet humans were expected to act with ingenuity and responsibility. Labor was divinely sanctioned, and yet it was also a test. The proper use of divine gifts determined whether humans could sustain abundance or invite calamity. This principle was evident in both agriculture and social order. Humans learned irrigation and crop rotation, animal husbandry, and urban construction, all knowledge believed to have been bestowed by divine beings. But the successful application depended on human diligence, observation, and coordination. In this context, the flood myths take on profound significance. The catastrophic deluge that ended the pre-flood world was not merely a tale of destruction, but a reflection of the fragility of order, the limits of human and divine cooperation, and the consequences of failing to maintain cosmic balance. While the gods had provided guidance, humans, and even some junior deities could falter. Floods symbolized both the literal dangers of Mesopotamian life and the metaphysical consequences of imbalance, reminding all that the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity was delicate and needed continual attention. Beyond survival and governance, the Sumerians were keen observers of human psychology, society, and morality. Texts describe disputes among humans and gods, negotiations, rewards, and punishments, as well as social practices that reinforce cooperation and accountability. Myths of Enki mediating between gods and humans, of disputes settled through cleverness and foresight, illustrate an understanding of ethics as inseparable from practical and cosmic order. Wisdom, justice, and prudence were considered as vital to maintaining the world as agriculture and architecture, binding the spiritual, moral, and physical aspects of life into a single coherent framework. Art, music, and literature also flourished in this fertile era. Scribes recorded hymns, prayers, and epic tales that celebrated creation, divine lineage, and human ingenuity. These compositions preserved not only religious ideas, but historical memory, cultural values, and social norms. The interplay between narrative, ritual, and recorded knowledge created a society capable of sustaining itself, adapting to challenges, and reflecting upon its own nature. Every story, every ceremonial practice, every technological innovation was understood as part of a grand, interconnected system linking humanity to the divine and to the cosmos. That be why examining the Sumerian approach to pre-flood civilization, we see a sophisticated understanding of causality, responsibility, and collaboration. Humans were not the slaves of the gods, but participants in a shared cosmic project. Their work, their ingenuity, and their ethical conduct were integral to the stability of the world. Even the most mundane tasks, digging canals, tending flocks, building walls, were imbued with cosmic significance, a reminder that every action, however small, contributed to the ongoing maintenance of creation. This perspective challenges modern assumptions about ancient humans as passive or primitive. The Sumerians conceived of themselves as active agents within a universe carefully structured, yet requiring vigilance, intelligence, and cooperation. They understood that survival and prosperity depended on harmonizing with both natural forces and divine mandates. A dual awareness that combined observation, theology, and practical knowledge in ways that modern readers can still learn from today. As the ordered cosmos matured and human civilization took shape, the Anunnaki began to emerge more prominently within the divine hierarchy. Unlike the primordial deities who had directly forged the universe from the waters of Namu and established the fundamental framework of existence, the Anunnaki were children and grandchildren of these earlier gods. Their roles were specialized, their authority circumscribed, and their influence highly structured. They did not create humanity from scratch or descend from distant stars with grandiose plans. Rather, they were assigned functions within an already established cosmic order, tasked with maintaining balance and enforcing divine law across the earth and the lower realms. The Anunnaki were closely associated with the earth, particularly with its hidden and chthonic aspects. They presided over the underworld, determined human fate, and oversaw the cycles of life and death. Within the Sumerian worldview, they acted as judges and custodians, responsible for ensuring that human society adhered to the principles set forth by the senior gods. Their judgment was precise and often unyielding, reflecting a cosmos in which law, order, and justice were as real and vital as rivers and crops. Humans looked to the Anunnaki not for creation, but for the administration of order, guidance and ritual practice, and the assurance that cosmic law would be upheld. The Sumerian texts describe complex interactions between humans and the Anunnaki, particularly in the post-creation, pre-flood era. Humans, newly imbued with consciousness and cultivated skills, worked diligently to fulfill the roles assigned by Enki and the other senior gods. The Anunnaki observed, directed, and occasionally intervened to correct errors, prevent excess, or mete out punishment for transgression. They acted as intermediaries between the cosmic and human realms, translating divine mandates into practical action on Earth. Their presence was both reassuring and intimidating. Humans depended on their guidance, yet they understood that the Anunnaki were bound to the impartial enforcement of cosmic law, not human sentiment. Textual evidence shows that the Anunnaki were organized hierarchically. Within the pantheon, certain Anunnaki were given specific domains, some presiding over cities, some over rivers, and others over agriculture or judicial matters. Their governance was codified through ritual, myth, and temple administration, reflecting an understanding that divine oversight needed structure to prevent disorder. Human kings, priests, and scribes were expected to recognize and honor these divine hierarchies, integrating religious observance with civic duty. The Anunnaki were not aloof observers. They were deeply embedded in the administration of the world, a divine bureaucracy intertwined with human society. One particularly significant function of the Anunnaki was the supervision of humanity's labor. While humans were created to relieve the gods of the physical toil required to sustain civilization, building temples, tending canals, cultivating fields, the Anunnaki ensured that this labor remained aligned with cosmic order. They intervened when humans failed to maintain canals, mismanaged crops, or disrupted sacred spaces, reminding humanity that work was not just practical, but sacred. Labor itself became a religious duty, a collaboration between divine expectation and human effort, symbolizing the broader principle that civilization required conscious stewardship to endure. The relationship between the Anunnaki and humans also had moral and ethical dimensions. Myths describe cases in which humans transgressed divine law, either through hubris, negligence, or ignorance, and the Anunnaki were called upon to deliver consequences. Yet the texts also emphasize mediation, negotiation, and corrective guidance. They were not arbitrary tyrants, but enforcers of a deeper principle. The human society could flourish only by understanding and participating in the cosmic order. Ritual, obedience, and communal responsibility were not merely ceremonial. They were essential to survival, prosperity, and alignment with the universe itself. In this period, humans began to record their own observations, experiences, and genealogies alongside the divine narratives. Scribes chronicled not only the actions of the gods and Anunnaki, but also the deeds of kings, the progress of cities, and the transformations wrought by technology and agriculture. This interplay between divine mandate and human agency created a rich tapestry of myth, history, and practical knowledge. It demonstrates that early Mesopotamian civilization was not passive or primitive. It was a dynamic system of interdependence, experimentation, and reflection, in which humans gradually assumed responsibility for managing the world while remaining accountable to the divine hierarchy. The flood narratives, preserved across multiple cities and later elaborated in Babylonian texts, further illustrate the Anunnaki's role in enforcing cosmic order. The Great Deluge was not merely a punishment, but a recalibration, a response to humanity's failure to maintain balance within the cosmos. The Anunnaki carried out this act under the oversight of senior gods, demonstrating both the severity and necessity of divine law. Survivors, such as the legendary Zeusidra, were chosen not because they were perfect, but because they embodied the principles necessary to restore and continue civilization. Through them, the continuity of human society could be secured, showing the intertwined fates of gods and humans, labor and morality, survival and cosmic justice. In essence, the Anunnaki serve as guardians and regulators in the Sumerian worldview. They do not originate creation, but they preserve it. They do not dictate every human action, but they shape outcomes through oversight, law, and guidance. Their existence illustrates a sophisticated understanding of hierarchy, responsibility, and interdependence, emphasizing that civilization is a cooperative enterprise requiring both divine insight and human initiative. After the deluge, the world had been reshaped, cleansed by waters that erased the old and prepared the stage for renewal. The flood was not merely a natural catastrophe. It was a cosmic intervention, a reset enforced by the Anunnaki under the guidance of the senior gods. Zeusidra, the survivor chosen to preserve humanity, emerged as a critical figure linking the pre-flood divine order to the post-flood civilization. His survival was no accident. It was carefully orchestrated, a combination of foresight, divine favor, and alignment with the principles of cosmic justice that the Anunnaki maintained as Zeusidra's role after the flood was foundational. He was entrusted with re-establishing human society, reconstructing settlements, and replanting the agricultural systems that had been obliterated. He also served as the human mediator between the Anunnaki and the post-flood population, ensuring that the divine mandates, laws, and rituals were reinstated properly. The flood had demonstrated the fragility of civilization without adherence to cosmic order, and Zeusidra embodied the lesson that humans could survive and thrive only through obedience, wisdom, and alignment with divine principles. The Anunnaki, meanwhile, resumed their supervisory roles, but the landscape had changed. The floodwaters had altered rivers, reshaped plains, and deposited fertile soil in new regions. They reorganized the divine oversight to match this new world, assigning specific deities to monitor the rejuvenated rivers, the rebuilt fields, and the repopulate cities. Each Anunnaki now had clearly defined territories and responsibilities, ensuring that no human activity could disrupt the delicate balance between earth, water, and sky. Human labor continued to serve divine purposes, but it was now framed by the memory of the flood, a reminder that chaos was ever present when cosmic law was ignored. Post-flood texts describe a new generation of human rulers, kings whose authority was still considered a divine gift, yet now operating in a more constrained temporal framework. Their lifespans, though still extraordinary, were far shorter than the mythological antediluvian kings, reflecting the shift from a mythic, near-divine existence to a more humanized epic. The Sumerian king list carefully preserves these distinctions, emphasizing that time itself had been recalibrated. Humanity now inhabited a universe that retained the imprint of the primordial and antediluvian periods, but one in which mortality, toil, and responsibility became essential components of existence. In this renewed world, human civilization began to flourish under the guidance of the Anunnaki and the wisdom of Enki. Cities were rebuilt, canals redug, and agriculture expanded into new regions. Temples were reconstructed on sites of cosmic significance, such as Eridu, reaffirming the sacred connections between divine presence and human settlement. Writing, law, and administration developed further, now deeply entwined with religious observance. Humans documented both history and myth, intertwining memory, ritual, and practical knowledge to ensure that the lessons of the past would not be forgotten. The post-flood era also saw the continued integration of divine gifts into human society. Agricultural techniques, metalworking, and irrigation systems were preserved and refined, reflecting the ongoing collaboration between humans and the Anunnaki. Each technological and societal innovation was understood as both practical and sacred, a continuation of the process by which the gods had transformed humanity from primitive laborers into active participants in civilization. Knowledge was treated as a divine inheritance, and mastery over nature as a moral and religious responsibility. Interestingly, the Anunnaki's presence after the flood was also regulatory in the moral and ethical sense. Humans could not act purely on impulse. They were accountable to the divine hierarchy. The texts describe the Anunnaki observing, judging, and occasionally correcting human actions, demonstrating that law and justice were woven into the very fabric of society. In some narratives, humans petitioned the Anunnaki, offered sacrifices, or consulted oracles to ensure their decisions aligned with cosmic principles. This interplay between divine oversight and human agency reinforced the Sumerian understanding that civilization required continuous attention, moral awareness, and alignment with cosmic order. Moreover, the post-flood myths reveal how the Sumerians conceptualized time and history. Pre-flood epics operated on mythic, almost eternal scales, where kings ruled for tens of thousands of years and the boundary between gods and humans was permeable. Post-flood time, by contrast, was finite, linear, and measurable, reflecting the mortal condition of humans now fully embedded within the natural world. This transition illustrates the Sumerian perception of a cosmos evolving from undifferentiated potential to ordered multiplicity, where divine law and human responsibility coexist to maintain stability. Through the survival of Zayusadra, the reorganization of the Anunnaki, and the reconstruction of human society, the Sumerian texts convey a powerful lesson. Existence is not static, but requires ongoing attention, collaboration, and balance. Creation is not a single moment frozen in myth. It is a continuous process in which divine forces, natural law, and human effort interact. The flood narrative is not just a story of destruction, but a demonstration of cosmic principles. How order emerges from chaos, how labor is sanctified, and how mortality and divinity intersect to sustain life. After the floodwaters receded and the land began to reveal its renewed contours, human civilization slowly emerged from the watery ruins, guided and supervised by the Anunnaki. The cities that had existed before, Urdu, Badtara, Larak, Sapar, and Shurapak, had to be rebuilt not merely as shelters for survival, but as centers of administration, ritual, and culture. These urban centers were designed to reflect the cosmic order established by the primordial deities, incorporating both practical function and sacred symbolism. Streets, canals, temples, and marketplaces were not laid out randomly. Their organization mirrored the structure of the heavens, the flow of water, and the divine hierarchy that governed existence. Eridu, still considered the oldest and most sacred city, became the focal point of this reconstructed civilization. Enki's temple, the Eabzu, rose again over the primordial waters, reaffirming the city's connection to the cosmic ocean from which creation had originally emerged. Pilgrims, priests, and rulers alike visited Eridu to pay homage, to receive divine wisdom, and to participate in rituals that maintain the balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. The city symbolized the perfect harmony between the mortal and the divine, a tangible expression of the abstract principles that had existed before the flood of Badtibara, associated with metallurgy and craft, became the technological hub of post-flood Sumeria. Under the supervision of the Anunnaki, humans mastered the extraction and processing of metals, learning to transform copper, tin, and eventually bronze into tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. This technological knowledge was not seen as mere utility. It was a sacred craft, a continuation of the divine labor that had characterized the antediluvian world. By mastering these arts, humans were participating directly in the ongoing maintenance of cosmic order, transforming raw materials into instruments that reflected the intelligence and ingenuity of both mortals and gods. In Larak, ritual and healing took precedence. Temples dedicated to purification and restoration became centers of learning where priestly specialists trained to perform rites that ensured the spiritual and physical well-being of the population. Here, humans learned that health, ritual, and morality were interconnected. Disease or misfortune could upset not just human society, but also the cosmic balance, and thus rituals were designed to realign the mortal world with the divine. Sapar, sacred to Utu, the sun god, functioned as a center of law and knowledge. It was here that scribes were trained to record laws, histories, and religious texts, ensuring that each generation had access to accumulated wisdom. The texts emphasize that the sun's journey across the sky was more than a measure of time. It was a model of justice and order. Through careful observation, humans learned to align their activities with cosmic rhythms, establishing calendars, festivals, and governance systems that reflected celestial patterns. Shurapak, the city most closely associated with Zayusadra, became a symbol of survival and continuity. It was a living testament to the lessons of the flood, obedience to divine law, respect for cosmic order, and the necessity of preserving knowledge across generations. The city's temples and administrative centers were built not only for human needs, but also to honor the deities who had ensured that civilization survived its greatest trial. The Anunnaki, meanwhile, were omnipresent yet structured in their involvement. Each deity had specific responsibilities, forming a complex divine bureaucracy. Enki remained the wise overseer, ensuring that the flow of water, the fertility of soil, and the progress of technology aligned with cosmic and human needs. Ninhursag, the goddess of fertility and birth, watched over human reproduction and agricultural abundance. Utu, the sun god, ensured that justice prevailed and that light illuminated both literal and metaphorical darkness. Inanna balanced love, war, fertility, and destruction, embodying the duality inherent in creation and guiding humans in understanding the interplay of life's opposing forces. Human labor continued to be vital, but it was now more sophisticated. Agriculture had expanded beyond subsistence. Irrigation systems channeled rivers to support city gardens, grain fields, and orchards. Metalworking allowed for construction of advanced tools, reinforcing the productivity of society. Temple rituals structured daily life, ensuring that humans remained aligned with divine will. The gods were both patrons and regulators, their supervision necessary for human survival, but their involvement also allowed humans to flourish in ways they could not achieve alone. This period also marked the consolidation of social hierarchy and specialized roles. Kings and priests acted as intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the people, embodying divine authority while managing practical affairs. Artisans, farmers, scribes, and builders each had designated roles, their labor valued and integrated into the larger cosmic design. The myths emphasize that this structure was essential. Without it, humanity risked repeating the chaos of the flood, allowing disorder to spread and undo the hard-won balance between gods, humans, and nature in essence. Post-flood civilization was a partnership between the divine and mortal, a careful orchestration of labor, knowledge, and reverence. Humans were elevated from mere survival to participation in the divine plan, inheriting not only material skills, but also a moral and spiritual framework. They were entrusted with preserving the order established by the gods, maintaining temples and cities, cultivating the land, and ensuring that cosmic laws were respected in daily life. The Sumerian texts, when read carefully, show this as a formative era, a time when humanity's potential was being fully realized under divine guidance. The flood was a reset, a purification that allowed humans to inherit the world in a structured, ordered form, with the Anunnaki watching, guiding, and intervening as needed. Civilization had returned, stronger and more organized, yet always within the framework set by the primordial and antediluvian order. As centuries passed in this post-flood world, the role of humans began to evolve. No longer mere laborers under the direct supervision of the gods, they began to take on more responsibility for maintaining order, administering cities, and interpreting divine will. The Sumerian texts describe a gradual transition. While the Anunnaki still oversaw cosmic and earthly functions, humans began to emerge as active participants in governance, agriculture, and religious observance. Kingship, which had descended from heaven, became the primary institution through which humans interfaced with the divine. Eridu remained the archetype of sacred kingship. Its rulers were not merely political leaders. They were intermediaries between heaven and earth, vessels through which divine authority flowed. The earliest post-flood kings inherited both the knowledge and the responsibility of their antediluvian predecessors, though their lifespans were now far more limited. Their authority was legitimized not by conquest or popular consent, but by divine ordination, a direct link to the Anunnaki and the primordial deities. These kings performed rituals, maintained temples, and ensured that societal labor aligned with both cosmic and earthly needs. Every decree, every public act, was infused with theological significance. Yet human kingship was not static. With time, the Sumerians began to recognize that mortal rulers, however divinely sanctioned, were imperfect. The text described kings who succeeded and failed, who adhered to cosmic principles, and those who fell into hubris. The wisdom of the gods remained a guide, but humans now had to exercise judgment, creativity, and moral discernment. This interplay between divine guidance and human agency became a central theme in Sumerian political thought. Civilization could flourish only when humans understood their role within a larger cosmic order, acting as stewards rather than masters. The Anunnaki, while no longer directly supervising daily labor, continued to influence the mortal realm in ways both subtle and profound. Festivals and temple ceremonies ensured that humans remained aware of divine presence and responsibility. Agricultural cycles, aligned with celestial patterns, were maintained through observation, ritual, and seasonal planning. Scribes recorded laws, histories, and omens, creating an intricate network of knowledge that linked temporal human affairs with eternal cosmic principles. Knowledge itself became sacred, a bridge between the mortal and divine, a tool to preserve order and prevent the recurrence of chaos. Social hierarchies solidified alongside this growing human autonomy. Priests, artisans, farmers, and administrators all understood their positions as part of a divine plan. The distinction between ordinary humans and kings, between the mortal and the semi-divine, was reinforced through ritual, iconography, and myth. Yet the Sumerian texts suggest that even those in lower social positions were valued for their contribution to cosmic balance. Labor was sacred, and each individual's role, whether tending sheep, harvesting grain, or inscribing cuneiform tablets, was considered essential to maintaining the order established by Namu, Enki, Enlil, and the other primordial deities. This period also saw the codification of law and morality. Texts like the Code of Uarnemu, one of the earliest known law codes, reflect the Sumerian understanding that divine order must be mirrored in human society. Justice was not merely social, it was cosmic. A ruler who ignored law or failed in duty risked not only civil unrest, but divine displeasure. The king's legitimacy depended upon both obedience to divine principles and effective governance. Reinforcing the delicate balance between autonomy and submission, human initiative and divine oversight. Moreover, the Sumerians began to weave their history into myth, blending recollections of antediluvian kings and divine interventions with contemporary rulers and events. Stories of the Great Flood, the primordial deities, and the Anunnaki were retold, reinterpreted, and embedded into temple liturgies and educational texts. These narratives served multiple functions, preserving memory, providing moral and cosmological instruction, and legitimizing contemporary authority. In doing so, the Sumerians created a continuous thread linking humanity to the gods, a narrative in which human society, technology, and governance were all framed as extensions of divine. As centuries continued, humanity's connection to the Anunnaki and the earlier deities began to shift subtly. Direct contact with gods became rarer, and the emphasis moved toward symbolic and ritual mediation. Temples became centers not just of worship, but of administration, education, and technology. Priests acted as intermediaries, translating divine intentions into human action, while kings implemented those actions in the temporal world. This separation marked the beginning of what modern scholars might call the humanization of civilization. Humans were increasingly responsible for their survival, their prosperity, and their moral choices, even as they remained deeply aware of their dependency on the cosmic order. In essence, the post-flood period was one of transition, from divine labor and supervision to human stewardship. From direct, godly involvement to mediated ritual, from antediluvian mythic time to historical, measurable time. It was a time when humans inherited not only the physical world, but also the responsibility for its maintenance, guided by knowledge, ritual, and the enduring presence of the gods. Civilization became an ongoing partnership between mortals and the divine, a collaboration that balanced creativity, obedience, and reverence, ensuring that the fragile order of existence established by Namu and her descendants would endure as human society matured. The Sumerians mastered the delicate balance between divine guidance and human initiative. Agriculture flourished, cities grew, and writing became a powerful tool for both communication and preservation of knowledge. Each technological advance, from irrigation systems to metallurgy, from wheel-driven transport to the codification of law, was framed not merely as human ingenuity, but as an extension of the cosmic order that the gods had established. Every brick laid in a temple, every field plowed, every grain harvested was a small reflection of the divine blueprint. The Anunnaki, once the overseers of cosmic balance, gradually receded from direct involvement in human affairs. Their presence remained influential, but increasingly symbolic. Their judgments, rituals, and stories became the scaffolding upon which human society built its understanding of morality, justice, and order. The divine hierarchy that had shaped creation now inspired human governance and cultural institutions. Humans learned to interpret the patterns of the cosmos themselves, to read the heavens, to predict the flooding of rivers, to anticipate the cycles of seasons and stars. In doing so, humanity assumed a stewardship role, inheriting responsibility for maintaining the balance first established by Namu, Enki, and Enlil. The flood, remembered in mythic and historical memory, became a dividing line between eras, a cosmic reset that emphasized both the fragility and resilience of human civilization. From the catastrophe arose a world where humans were no longer mere laborers for divine beings. They were participants in a living, ordered cosmos. Civilization's growth, its art, its cities, and its law reflected the lessons learned from the early generations. That creation required care, that power demanded responsibility, and that existence itself was a collaborative venture between the divine and the mortal in the end. The Sumerian texts reveal a vision of humanity not as a product of whim or extraterrestrial meddling, but as an intentional, sacred creation. We were formed from the primordial clay, imbued with divine essence, shaped to participate in a cosmos carefully crafted over untold generations of gods. Our role was not passive. It was active stewardship, a responsibility that demanded intellect, creativity, and reverence. The gods provided the framework, but humans built upon it, transforming potential into reality. This ancient understanding, long predating modern reinterpretations and speculative theories, presents humanity as an integral part of a cosmic order, capable of both profound accomplishment and tragic failure. The Sumerians understood the world as layered and interconnected. Heaven, earth, the waters above and below, gods and humans, all bound in a delicate equilibrium. And from that vision, they left us not only myths and stories, but a blueprint of what it means to exist in partnership with the forces that shape reality itself. The story ends not with the dramatic descent of gods or an epic battle, but with the establishment of human society as a living, breathing extension of the cosmos, a civilization that carries forward the work of creation, guided by memory, ritual, knowledge, and the enduring echoes of those first divine architects. Humanity, created to lift the burden of the gods, became the inheritor of their wisdom, the keeper of cosmic order, and the custodian of the world that had emerged from the endless potential of Namu's primordial waters. And in this way, the oldest written memories of mankind, those clay tablets, those marks pressed by ancient hands, speak across millennia, reminding us of where we came from, what responsibilities were granted to us, and how the divine and mortal have always been intertwined in the unfolding story of existence. This is the story as the Sumerian texts tell it. The origins of gods, humans, and civilization, unadorned by modern speculation, rooted in the deepest memory of our species, and enduring as a testament to humanity's place in the cosmos.